Chapter 2402. Mag had always agreed with the saying that those who receive benefits should not be forgiven. Therefore, Mag began to interrogate Shishi after she finished 3 bowls of rice and took away the last piece of braised pork in the pot with a satisfied smile. "Is it good?" Meg asked with a grin. "Not bad." She wiped the grease at the corner of her mouth with a tissue. Her calmness had a hint of unnaturalness. This pot of braised pork and 3 bowls of rice in exchange for 3 questions. Isn't that too much? Meg continued with a smile. She's expression froze. She glanced at Meg. "I've said that I have no authority to divulge information related to the buried city. Don't be nervous. I'm just asking some basic questions. It won't involve any secrets." Meg took a sip of wine. "Moreover, since the people of the buried city like to sneak in, I'll catch 1 or 2 sooner or later. These questions will come out from their mouths sooner or later, won't they? Your way of thinking is a little dangerous." She frowned but could not refute Meg's words. Hundreds of buried city residents sneaked into Chaos City every year. With Meg's current ability and status, it was not difficult to catch 1 or 2. However, Meg's way of thinking had already touched upon the rules of the buried city. "Then I'm going to start. First question, is the buried city controlled by tycoons?" Meg went straight to the point. She took a deep look at Meg and said no. "Is the military under the command of a unified government or an independent existence?" Meg asked again. "I can't answer this question." She refused directly. "Did you send this mecha today?" Meg asked the last question. "No." "Okay, 3 questions over." Meg smiled and raised his glass. "For peace." She stared at him for a while before raising her glass and finishing it in 1 gulp. "Actually, I don't have any ill intentions towards the dungeon. It would be good if both sides maintained their previous state and never interacted with each other. Of course, the premise is that today's incident won't happen again." Meg put down his wine glass and said indifferently, "The one who died today was my mother-in-law, and that guy only lost a mech. I still remember this grudge." The vigilance between Shi's brows eased a little. She had already reported today's matter, but with her rank, she would not receive any feedback from the higher-ups. However, this demigod-level mecha was definitely not from the military. The reason was very simple. The current mecha possessed by the military was far inferior to the one that appeared in the elves' territory today. Even in the underground city, no one had ever heard of a demigod-level mech. One had to know that even in the underground city, a level 10 powerhouse was still a top existence. The number of extraordinaires could be counted on one hand. They were the elders who did not care about worldly affairs. A demigod-level mecha had appeared on the Norland continent. She could already imagine the shock it would cause when the news reached the military. The military would definitely want this mecha back. If Meg did not give it to her, she would not be able to get it. The military would naturally send someone who could get it. However, just as Meg said, this mecha had killed the Elven Queen and a dozen elves today. Although the guy hiding behind the mecha had lost a mecha, he was not injured. He was unwilling to give the mecha to her, so he probably had the intention of making a deal. "We don't know who is controlling the mecha at the moment, but if you don't want to give it to me, someone else will come and get it," she said. "Then let him bring what I want in exchange. After all, he has to pay with his life for killing." I don't know if this principle applies in the underground city. Meg's knuckles gently knocked on the wine glass, making a crisp sound. "Goodbye." She got up and went out. "I won't see you out." Meg's voice came from behind her. Meg looked at the slowly closing door in silence for a while. He poured himself another glass of wine and asked in his mind, "System, have you learned it? If you can copy it, it would be a waste to exchange this broken mecha for a stainless steel basin." "Host, are you still human to let a gourmet system do this kind of thing? You are forcing this system to do something improper. Aren't you a system that loves to learn? Now that a product of a higher civilization is in front of you, don't you have any ambition? You have to know that even if it's just growing vegetables, you have to always have a positive heart. Otherwise, how are you going to follow me to conquer all the worlds in the future?" Meg said passionately. The system was silent for a while before saying faintly, "Why does this sound a little wrong? As a system, shouldn't I be the one urging the host to work hard and learn? As a system, being a vegetable is the original sin. Meg clicked his tongue and said, "Look at Amy's system. The printer she casually took out is nuclear-powered. Tell me, what can you do?" I can grow vegetables," the system said weakly. "Then let me ask you, if the underground city invades the Norland continent, with your current ability, can you protect your farm and ranch? Can you guarantee that the fish in your fish pond won't be taken away by them? Can you guarantee that the rice that you painstakingly grow won't be trampled by them?" Meg's words hit the system hard. I can't, right?" The system's voice trembled slightly. "Now, I'm giving you a new mission. Disassemble and understand this mecha within 3 days. Find a replacement replication method within 7 days, and replicate the first prototype within a month. Mission completion reward: a demigod-level door god. Mission failure punishment: the ownership of all the markets may be transferred to someone else," Meg said with a serious expression. "I accept." "Wait." The system's voice paused. "Why does this feel weird? Why is the host giving the system a mission now? Also, didn't I create this reward myself?" "The mission has been given. Whether you can complete it or not is up to you. Don't you have a group chat? If you don't understand anything, you can ask your friends. Don't tell me you've been kicked out of the group chat." Learning system. A line of small words floated across Meg's mind. The system went offline immediately. Meg was stunned. He laughed. "Good heavens. Don't tell me I've really been kicked out of the group chat. That's fucking embarrassing." After finishing the wine in his glass and cleaning up the table and kitchen, Meg went upstairs. After washing up, he didn't go straight to bed. Instead, he went to the study and took out the Miss Black Cat picture book that and had hand-drawn. Humans couldn't earn money beyond their knowledge, and they couldn't tell stories beyond their knowledge. Vicky came from the underground city. She was the daughter of a big family and should have some connections with the military. That was why she had an independent battleship and could operate a mecha skillfully. Therefore, Meg planned to study the Miss Black Cat that Vicky had created. Perhaps it hid the social structure of the underground city. End of chapter. Chapter 24:03. After a sleepless night, Meg rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the various relationship charts and social system inferences on the small blackboard at the side. A smile appeared on his lips. Miss Black Cat was a typical inspirational story of a woman breaking free from the shackles of society and family and charging towards freedom. Men were superior to women, arranged marriages, and a setback in her career. Of course, this kind of story was not considered novel on Earth, but it was very novel and groundbreaking in the Norland continent. Therefore, the opera and picture book were a huge success. And in this story, the society described by Vicky incorporated some of the local customs of Rodu, but there were also many differences from the current world after careful study. In Miss Black Cat, one could clearly feel the strong power of the family. Although it was blurred out as nobles, Meg could see the kind of high and mighty looking down between the lines. It was more like a black hand hiding behind the power, such as a certain country's tycoon. Vicky's family's power and influence could also be seen. She was indeed a rich young lady. This lady is much more simple-minded than she. Should I take the time to go to Rodu again? Meg stroked his chin and pondered. She had received professional training. Even with delicious food, there was no way to get much useful information from her. But Vicky was different. Although this lady was smart, she was not as rigid as she. Moreover, there might be another personality in her head. Although they had not officially come into contact, it might be a breakthrough. The military's power was not described in Miss Black Cat, so it was difficult for Meg to deduce whether the tycoons had control over the military. There should be many people who did not sleep well last night, right? Meg wiped away the relationship chart on the small blackboard and left the study. "Marshal, the analysis report of the Mecha Corps is out. This corps does not come from the military, nor does it belong to the 5 major companies. The technology is 1 generation ahead of the core that the military has put into use. It belongs to the 132nd generation of the core among the 5 major companies. It is still in the research and development stage, but the information is limited at the moment." A staff member walked into the office and handed the scroll tablet to Ferdinand, who was sitting behind the desk, respectfully. Ferdinand flipped through the information, frowned, and said, "You can't find the source? You can't crack it either?" The core was set to self-destruct, but it was violently destroyed by an unknown external force, and the self-destruct mode was activated. After dismantling it, very little useful information was obtained, and it was not enough to crack the code. As for the source, the technicians are stepping up their investigation. At present, the inference is that the existence of this core technology that surpasses the Big Five is most likely from the Immortal Organization. In the previous operation, similar technological means were discovered. The staff quickly replied. "The Undying?" Ferdinand's frown deepened. "It's these guys again. Marshal, the technical department has requested to inspect the other parts of the mech. Perhaps we can find more information from the other parts," said the staff member. "There's no time for that now. Let them continue to investigate this core." Ferdinand raised his hand, indicating for the staff to leave. Ferdinand was the only one left in the office. The display on the wall started to play a battle video. A masked man slashed a mecha that was more than 100 meters tall into two halves with a single slash of his sword. Then he stomped on the mecha's core, which was about to self-destruct, and played the clip on a loop. The video paused, and the metal capsule that had been kicked away by the man was zoomed in. There was a little elf inside. Is this little fellow their target? Ferdinand pondered. Yesterday, she had sent back news that a demigod-level mecha had appeared on the Norland continent and caused the death of the Elven Queen and High Priestess. This was no small matter. The underground city prohibited private individuals from crossing between the two realms, but it was not stopped. Every year, the border enforcement team would arrest hundreds of border crossers. These border crossers had different abilities, but there were very few 10th-tier existences. The more powerful one was, the more one would understand the price one had to pay for such behavior. As for extraordinaries, they were no longer restricted. The abilities of border crossers were limited, and most of them avoided the pursuit of the enforcement team. After arriving on the Norland continent, they rarely caused trouble. This incident caused the death of the Elven Queen and High Priestess. It was a major event that was enough to shake the foundation of the Norland continent. And the cause of this incident was actually a mecha. Its ability was far beyond 10th tier, close to that of an extraordinary's mecha. Level 10th tier mechas were still in the stage of small-scale production among the Big Five. Now, there was actually someone who could operate an extraordinary mecha and cross over to kill and rob. This was completely beyond the control of the military. However, this mecha did not escape unscathed. Instead, it was destroyed by this young human called Meg Alex. While he was surprised by the young man's ability, Ferdinand's admiration for him also increased by a few notches. This was not the first time he had noticed this man. This young man was known as the most powerful person on the Norland continent. He had once led the Norland continent's encirclement and annihilation of the Great Old Ones, and successfully sealed Cthulhu. She had interacted with him before, and he had saved Vicky's life. Speaking of which, he still owed him a favor. He should be one of the few people on the Norland continent who knew about the existence of the underground city. Moreover, he had detained that mecha and made his own request. Interesting. Seems like I should also take some time to make a trip to the Norland continent. Ferdinand turned off the video and stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window to look at the busy base outside. A cold smile appeared on his lips. Those old farts. Are they trying to break the rules again? But this time, an interesting little fellow has appeared. This stupid human made me lose a super mecha. Damn it! In an ancient and dim hall, a low and hoarse voice reverberated in the empty hall. At the end of the hall, there was a huge black stone pillar. Ancient inscriptions covered the stone pillar, and at the top of the stone pillar, there was a black and gold spear. The spear was nailed to the stone pillar, piercing through an indescribable thing that was like chaos. The stone pillar and spear seemed to have existed for countless years, but that indescribable object that was half chaotic seemed to still be breathing as it squirmed irregularly. Below the stone pillar, there was a black stone chair. Shrouded by the shadow cast by the stone pillar, a hunched and thin figure sat in the darkness. And below, there were 4 men in black robes. They wore the same faceless mask and stood with their heads lowered. Kill him and get the divine infant back. A voice came from the darkness again. Yes. One of them stepped out silently and then disappeared from the hall instantly. Hall Master, the military is closely investigating the origin of the Mecca. Do we need to use our power to suppress this matter? A faceless man asked softly. No need. Since Ferdinand already knows about this, then it can't be suppressed. Let him investigate. I want to see what he can find out. Chapter 2404. This morning, the first customer the restaurant welcomed was Michael. Meg had just come downstairs when the bell rang. The city lord is here so early. The restaurant isn't open yet. Meg opened the door with a smile. You should know why I'm here to disturb Mr. Max so early. Michael also smiled at Meg. Aren't you going to invite me in? Please come in. Meg stepped aside and closed the door after Michael entered. I'm sure Mr. Mack has heard about what happened to the elves. What do you think? Michael went straight to the point and asked Meg. Meg knew that Michael had already guessed his identity, but he was a smart person. If he didn't point it out, everyone would continue to act. I don't have a clue yet, but it shouldn't have anything to do with the great old ones, Meg said. He wasn't going to tell a third party about the underground city for the time being. After all, they hadn't completely fallen out yet. Meg was still waiting for the attitude of the person behind she. There couldn't be only one voice in a world. They painstakingly isolated the two worlds from each other, completely hid the underground city, and captured people who crossed the border. This meant that their ruler probably didn't want the two worlds to collide and interact. The death of the Elven Queen and Helena is a huge shock to all the races, but we know nothing about our opponent. Michael looked at Meg. If it's not the great old ones, then who has such powerful abilities? There might be some powerful existences that we don't know about on the Norland continent, such as the sealed great old ones or the hidden powerhouses, Meg said frankly. Of course, those who can be killed don't deserve to be called the great old ones. Michael's eyelids twitched. He was a little worried about the fate of the races on the Norland continent. However, Mag made it sound so easy. Although that monster was killed by him with a single slash, its terrifying power of fighting the elven powerhouses alone, and even causing the queen and the high priest to die of exhaustion, still made all the other races wary. Meg's strength had already exceeded the range of level 10, and should be included in the legendary god realm. However, there was no such expert among the various races. If such a powerful monster appeared in the territories of the various races again, the consequences would be unimaginable. Don't look at me. I'm just a chef. I just made the tofu pudding. Do you want some? Meg's voice drifted out from the kitchen. Please make an exception and pack one for me. My wife said that she hasn't had tofu pudding in a few days, and she was still complaining to me yesterday, Michael said with a pleading smile as he stood at the entrance of the kitchen. Meg looked at him and pondered. How fast are you? In 3 minutes. Michael patted his chest. Then you still have to be careful. Normally, a normal man can last for more than 3 minutes. Meg looked at Michael sympathetically. You can come to the restaurant more often to eat Buddha jumps over the wall. It's very nutritious. Meg still packed 2 servings of tofu pudding for Michael, 1 sweet and 1 savory. He also brought his young mistress Cher along. There's no use in rushing things like this. Everything has to be done slowly, Meg said earnestly as he patted Michael's shoulder. Michael looked at Meg. He felt that there was a hidden meaning in his words, but he couldn't understand it. Thanks. Michael took out a dragon coin and placed it on the table. He took the initiative to pack 3 bowls of congee with pork and century egg before leaving satisfactorily. Meg knew that Michael was indeed very fast. He was able to send these 2 servings of tofu pudding back to the manor in the best time to eat it. This was much better than a certain group. As for what Michael said earlier, it was also within his expectations. The various races had yet to escape from the shadow of the great old ones, and now the sudden deaths of the Elven Queen and Helena happened. This kind of unknown and powerful existence was often even more terrifying. Irina came downstairs in her tulle pajamas. Her long and smooth legs were faintly visible under the skirt. What did that woman say when she came yesterday? Ah, you didn't sleep last night? Meg felt a little guilty. Irina pulled out a chair and sat opposite Meg with her fair legs crossed. She sneered with a hint of mockery. Ha. She got me drunk and then hooked up with other women behind my back. Wasn't that satisfying? First of all, you got drunk yourself. There's no such thing as getting drunk. Secondly, I wasn't hooking up with other women. It was a necessary social interaction for work. Lastly, it wasn't satisfying at all. I fought monsters in the day and had to be careful of the soul trainer at night. I had to prepare a table full of dishes to entertain clients in the middle of the night. After sending the clients away, I had to clean up the table. After that, I had to stay up all night to do the relationship chart. I had to wake up early in the morning to cook and prepare to open for business. The more Meg spoke, the more he felt wronged. All this suffering, all this tiredness, for who? Irina stared at Meg for a while and was unmoved. Instead, she said faintly, "Why? Do you want me to praise you? That's not necessary. That woman came yesterday to ask for something. I gave her half and told her to get someone in charge to take the remaining half. Her words don't count." Meg immediately changed his attitude. "Aren't you worried that they'll gather a few gods to kill you first? If they don't mind the buried city being completely exposed, they can try." Meg smiled with some confidence. "What if this mech was sent by them? We can only take a gamble now. The buried city isn't a monolithic block, and the power behind, she just happens to be at odds with the power behind this mech monster." Meg said casually, "If we win the gamble, we might have another friend. If we lose, we can only fight with our lives on the line." "How confident are you?" 80%. If the power behind she is the mech operator, she wouldn't have come last night. The normal scenario would be two extraordinaires descending from the sky and completely destroying Mamis. Irina fell into deep thought. With her intelligent mind, she quickly figured out the reason behind it. "So, you took a gamble with us last night? I borrowed that trident from Lil Guai and placed it on the roof. It can more or less avoid lightning, so it's not like we have no chance of winning," Meg said frankly. He didn't sleep last night. Other than reading, he was also somewhat vigilant. "What do you want for breakfast?" Meg asked with a smile. "Congee with pork and century egg and tofu pudding," Irina said without hesitation. Sob, sob, sob. A baby's cry came from upstairs. Meg and Irina looked at each other and fell into silence. "You have experience. You go," Irina said. "You brought it back. Shouldn't you go?" Meg tried to shirk the responsibility. "Little Yai, be a good girl. Don't cry. Annie will bring you downstairs to eat." Gina's gentle voice sounded at the stairs along with the sound of footsteps. End of chapter. Chapter 24:05. Gina carried the toddler downstairs. The little fellow's big eyes were glistening with tears, and he looked like an aggrieved kitten. His eyes lit up when he saw Irina. He reached out his little hand and made a squeaking sound. Irina's gaze became gentler. She was about to take Mai from Gina's hands. Meg gave her a look. Irina's hand paused halfway. She patted Mai's head and smiled. "Is this the child you brought back yesterday? She's quite cute." "Yes, lady boss. You're back." Gina nodded with a smile. "Her name is Mai. She can't talk yet, but she seems to like you a lot. Do you want to get her something to eat? Let me hold her for a while." Irina smiled and reached out to take Mai from Gina. "I'll have to trouble you then." Gina walked towards the kitchen to prepare breakfast for Mai. Squeak. Mai acted coquettishly in Irina's arms, as if she had temporarily forgotten about her hunger. Taking care of a child was a technical job. Normal people wouldn't be able to do it. For example, Phyllis, who followed them downstairs. She was a young girl, but after one night, not only did she have two eye-catching dark circles under her eyes, but she also looked dull, as if she had been through some serious torture. "Boss, lady boss." Phyllis greeted Meg and the others. She stared at Mai in Irina's arms in a daze. "Oh, Phyllis, what happened to you?" Irina looked at Phyllis in surprise. It had only been one night. How did she become so dispirited? "Yes. Were you frightened yesterday?" Meg asked with concern. "No, nothing. I just didn't sleep the whole night watching her." Phyllis shook her head. She didn't forget to remind him, "You have to be careful when you carry her. Her body is very soft. She could get hurt easily." "Does Mai cause trouble at night?" Meg asked with some surprise. Some children were quite noisy at night, causing the people taking care of them to suffer. No, I woke up once last night. After drinking the goat's milk that Sister Gina prepared, I immediately fell asleep again. I slept soundly until dawn. Phyllis shook her head. Then why did you stare at her the whole night? Irina couldn't help laughing. I was worried that she would flip over and fall to the ground. The princess told me to take good care of her. Phyllis blushed and said in embarrassment, "It's Phyllis's first time taking care of baby, so she's too nervous. Actually, I've already set up a protective formation around her bed. Even if my wakes up in the middle of the night, she won't fall off the bed." Gina walked out of the kitchen with a milk bottle and handed it to Mai. The little guy consciously hugged the milk bottle and began to suck on it. It was extremely fragrant. "She's just too responsible." Gina looked at Phyllis with a smile and said tenderly, "But it's too tiring to take care of a baby like this. You still have to sleep when you need to. The little ones sleep soundly. As long as you let them fill their stomachs, you don't have to take care of them at all." "Okay, I'll be more careful next time." Phyllis nodded in embarrassment. "Phyllis, eat something first, then go upstairs and get some sleep. I'll be in charge of cutting the ingredients this morning." Meg scooped a bowl of tofu pudding for her. "You'll feel refreshed after you wake up." It's okay, boss. I can finish my job." Phyllis glanced at Mai. "Besides, I still have to take care of little Mai." "Okay, go to sleep. I have nothing to do this morning anyway. Let me take care of this child. It seems like she likes me," Irina said to Phyllis. "You can't take care of anyone like this." Phyllis felt a sense of familiarity from the lady boss. Inexplicably, she felt a little guilty and nodded obediently. After breakfast, Phyllis went upstairs to get some sleep. Mai drank 2 bottles of goat's milk before putting down the milk bottle in satisfaction. She lay in Irina's arms. "You've made so many delicious dishes. Is there nothing she can eat?" Irina asked Gina. Although goat's milk was good, it couldn't be compared to Meg's delicacies. Mai is still young. She's about 3 to 5 months old. She only has 3 baby teeth. She can't digest a lot of food, so it's safer to let her drink goat's milk for now, Gina explained. "When she's a little older, we can give her some supplementary food, but it can't be what we eat. It's too sweet or too salty. We have to make it for her." Irina nodded thoughtfully. She looked at Gina with emotion. "Gina, you know so much. So it's not easy to raise child." She couldn't help but look at Meg. Her gaze became gentler. Meg only smiled. He didn't know much about raising a child, either. "Where's little Guai? Is she still not awake?" Meg asked Gina. "She should be awake soon, but she's already learned how to dress and wash herself. She can go downstairs by herself," Gina said. "Mommy, my throat feels uncomfortable," little Guai said as she ran downstairs and looked up at Gina. "Are you sick?" Gina touched little Guai's head nervously and asked her to open her mouth. She didn't feel hot, and her throat didn't look red, either. "Do you want me to try healing?" Irina asked. "I think she's wearing her clothes inside out," Meg said faintly after watching for a while. The dining room was silent for a while. Then laughter erupted. Little Guai was wearing a pullover sweater today. It looked the same front and back. However, it was indeed inside out. That was why she felt like she was being strangled by fate. "Look at you. I told you to distinguish the front and back of your clothes before you put them on. Why'd you put them on so casually?" Gina said with a helpless smile as she changed little Guai's clothes. Little Guai poked her head out of the collar with some effort. She stuck her tongue out at Meg and said aggrievedly, "Why do I have to distinguish the front and back of my clothes? My neck is clearly round." At first glance, it sounded quite reasonable. Mai, come down and play with Big Sister." The little fellow stared at Mai in Irina's arms after changing her clothes. Mai lowered her head and stared at little Guai for a while. She didn't move for a while, as if she didn't want to. "Come down. Big Sister will bring you to ride the big cat." Little Guai grabbed Ugly Duckling, which was passing by, and sat on it skillfully. Ugly Duckling froze instantly. It turned to look at little Guai. It didn't dare to get angry, nor did it dare to say anything. Mai's eyes lit up when she saw Ugly Duckling. She waved her little paws and squeaked as if she couldn't wait to get on the ground. "All right, you can get on the ground to play if you want." Irina put Mai down on the ground directly. An elf cub wasn't as weak as a human cub. Although they were delicate, crawling was definitely not a problem for them. The dining room wasn't open for business yet. The floor had been cleaned with magic last night, so it was spotless. It was the cleanest playground for children. Chapter 2406. I was put on the ground and was stunned for a while. Then she stared at Ugly Duckling and imitated it by crawling toward it on all fours. Ugly Duckling also stared at Mai and slowly retreated, trying to control the distance between them. Ugly Duckling, don't move, little Guai warned as she patted its head gently. Ugly Duckling immediately stopped retreating and didn't dare to move. Mai crawled very slowly at first and even fell twice. However, she wasn't pretentious at all. She propped herself up again and continued to crawl forward. Gradually, she grasped the technique of crawling, and her speed also increased. Soon, she was in front of Ugly Duckling. Although Ugly Duckling wasn't a year old yet, it was still a head taller than Mai, who was lying on the ground. Mai looked up at Ugly Duckling with a cute smile on her little face. She couldn't free her hand from the ground, so she just put her face up and rubbed Ugly Duckling's chubby face gently. She giggled like a little hen. Ugly Duckling, Omega Omega. What's with being a little cute? You're a gentle person. Gina looked at Mai with a smile. It's in my nature. Irina also had a smile on her face. Yeah. Mai chased after Ugly Duckling and Little Guai as they crawled all over the ground. She was having a lot of fun. Wow, Little Mai's already learned how to crawl. Amy rubbed her sleepy eyes as she came down from upstairs. She saw Mai grabbing a table leg and getting ready to climb up, and she even learned Little Guai's tree climbing skills. Mai heard the sound and turned to look at Amy. She immediately gave up on climbing the table leg and crawled toward Amy instead. She looked up and called intimately, "Ya." Amy bent down, picked Mai up, and kissed her cheek. "Little Mai, call me Big Sister." Mai stared at her with her big blue eyes and called out, "Ya." "It's Big Sister, not Ya." Amy corrected her. "Ya," Mai called out again. "All right, whatever you like." Amy touched her head helplessly. After breakfast, Meg took Amy to school on his bicycle. "Father, will Mai be living with us from now on?" Amy asked from the back seat. "Yeah, some bad guys want to catch her, so we have to protect Sister Yai," Meg said with a smile. "Is he like the big monster from last time?" Amy's face showed a bit of fear. "Yes, the bad guy is very strong, so we have to be more careful. It's okay. Amy will become even stronger. When the time comes, I'll be able to protect everyone just like Father," Amy said seriously with a straight face. Meg parked his bicycle at the entrance of Chaos School and waved at Amy, who was bouncing around, as he said, "Then you have to study hard." The Crassus Magic Lab hadn't been moved to Hope School yet, so even though Amy was now a student of Hope School, she still came to Chaos School for lessons. "Master," Amy called out as soon as she arrived outside the magic room. The door of the magic lab slowly opened, and Crassus stood at the door with a smile. He first checked Amy from head to toe, and after making sure that she wasn't injured and that her magic power had improved a little, his smile became even brighter. "What delicious food did you bring for Master today?" "I brought rainbow fried rice and congee with pork and century egg." Amy handed him the takeout in her hand. "Good girl." Crassus took the takeout from Amy, but he wasn't in a hurry to eat. Instead, he closed the door of the magic lab and asked with a smile, "Amy, did you go to the Elven Queen's coronation yesterday?" Yes. Big Sister Sally became the Elven Queen," Amy said with a nod. "Then did you see a scary monster?" "Yes, it was a huge spider. It was over 100 meters tall, as big as a giant dragon. It was so scary that even the elves couldn't beat it." Amy nodded with a look of lingering fear. "What happened after that?" "After that, our hero Alex appeared. He severed the spider's leg with one slash of his sword, then split the spider in half with another slash of his sword. Finally, he crushed its heart with one stomp, and that was the end of the battle." Amy's face lit up with admiration as she recounted the story. "That's it." Crassus was stunned. He had heard about what happened to the elves yesterday. He only knew that the Elven Queen and Helena died of exhaustion after the battle, and that Alex appeared on the battlefield and killed the monster. However, according to Amy's description, The monster that broke through the elven powerhouse's defensive line was killed by Alex with only 2 slashes and 1 kick. The elves were not weak, and the elven queen and Helena's strength were not to be underestimated. It was clear that the monster was extremely powerful. However, this kind of power was different from that of the demons. At least, it was something that Alex could kill. At the same time, it also proved that Alex should be stronger than he was during the battle on the ice plains. Master, if you were here, would you be able to defeat that monster? Amy looked up at him and asked expectantly. This? Ahem. Of course, Master would be able to defeat it. Crassus's expression was slightly unnatural, but he still patted his chest and said, for a monster like this, Master only needs to use a fireball and a stick to finish it off. He could lose in anything, but he could not lose face in front of his precious disciple. Really? Amy looked a little doubtful. Of course, if there's a chance next time, Master will show you how powerful I am. Crassus patted his chest and said, then I want to learn this too. I want to beat the monster down with a fireball and a stick. Amy was eager to try. Okay. Master will teach you after breakfast. Crassus laughed. He was most afraid that his disciple would not be enthusiastic about learning, but now it seemed that it was right to go out more often. Sister She, why are you looking for me so early in the morning? On the rooftop of the Black Cat Opera House in Rodu, Vicky, who was wearing pajamas, looked at She and asked curiously while rubbing her sleepy eyes. Yesterday, a crosser appeared in Chaos City and killed the Elven Queen and High Priestess. For your safety, the Marshal asked me to bring you back to the underground city, she said calmly. What? The Elven Queen and High Priestess were killed? Vicky's expression changed. Who did it? Why? The Elven Queen and High Priestess being killed was equivalent to a beheading operation against the elves. If this was an official order from the underground city, it was tantamount to a declaration of war. I don't have the authority to know this, but it shouldn't be an order from the Marshal. She shook her head slightly. So far, she had not received any information from the underground city. End of chapter. Chapter 2407. She knew very well that with her authority, she would not get any effective response unless the higher-ups needed her to do something. What about the person who crossed the border? Was he caught by the law enforcement team? Vicky asked again. However, she thought about it and shook her head. A person who could kill the Elven Queen and the High Priestess should be close to the Transcendence level. Even if the law enforcement team arrived in time, they might not be able to stop him. The existence of the Transcendence level was also a rare powerhouse in the underground city. Vicky knew most of them. She could not imagine who it was that suddenly crossed the border and killed the Elven Queen. This went against the philosophy of the underground city. Is there going to be an all-out war? Vicky's expression became serious as she asked She. I haven't been notified yet, but the Marshal asked me to bring you back to the underground city, she said. Vicky thought for a while and said, I need to talk to my grandfather first. Please wait for me. She nodded and did not say anything else. Vicky went downstairs and entered the office. She locked the door, lit up her bracelet, and made a video call. Grandfather, is the underground city going to start a war with the Norland continent? Vicky looked at Ferdinand, who appeared in the video call, and asked directly, who told you this rumor? Or did your not-so-smart brain come up with it yourself? Ferdinand laughed. She said that the Elven Queen was killed by the transcendence of the underground city. If it's not for war, why would they kill the queen of a race? Vicky asked. The smile on Ferdinand's face gradually disappeared. His voice also became heavier as he said, There's no harm in telling you this. The one who killed the Elven Queen was not a transcendence, but a mecha with power close to that of a transcendence. However, this mecha is not from the military. It might be from the Undying. Mecha. Vicky was shocked. As a mecha operator, she knew very well what a mecha with power close to that of a transcendence meant. Aren't the Undying a very low-key and mysterious organization? Why did they suddenly cross the border and kill the Elven Queen in such a high-profile manner? Are they trying to start a war between the two worlds? This matter is still under investigation. The incident is still under control, and the possibility of a war between the two realms breaking out is not high. Ferdinand shook his head slightly. I plan to make a trip to the Norland continent personally. You're coming to the Norland continent in person? Vicky was shocked. She rolled her eyes and said, Then I won't go back to the underground city first. When you come to the Norland continent, I will be your tour guide and bring you to eat good food and have fun. Do you really like the Norland continent that much? Ferdinand asked with a smile. I've already treated the Norland continent as my second home. The people here are also very cute. Anyway, I don't want to see a war between the underground city and the Norland continent one day. That would be terrible. Vicky looked at Ferdinand sincerely. She was very clear that as the commander of the underground city's 3 armies, her grandfather, who had absolute authority in the military, had the ability to influence the decision. Ferdinand pondered for a moment and said, All right, then you will stay on the Norland continent for the time being. You will follow me back to the underground city when the time comes. After the call ended, Vicky's expression became much more relaxed. Since it was not an attack launched by the military, and her grandfather had come to the Norland continent personally to check, it meant that the possibility of a large-scale war between the two realms was not high. Vicky had limited knowledge about the Undying who were causing trouble. She only knew that it was a mysterious and powerful organization that was said to be inextricably linked to some ancient tycoons and families. But unlike those evil organizations, the Ancient Ones had never planned riots or attacks, so they were not on the military's bounty list. She did not expect that this mysterious organization would suddenly cross the border and kill the Elven Queen, and even use a mecha that was close to the extraordinary level. One had to know that the number of mechas that could reach the 10th tier after being piloted in the military was very limited. Mechas with extraordinary abilities were still in the state of concept, and their research and development had been stagnant for thousands of years. This meant that the Undying's mecha technology was even above the military's. This was a very dangerous signal. Extraordinary beings had terrifying abilities. If they could be mass-produced in an uncontrollable state, dangerous things could happen at any time. But why did her grandfather suddenly come to the Norland continent instead of staying in the underground city to track down the Undying? Vicky returned to the rooftop and saw she standing at the edge of the rooftop. She walked to her side and said, Grandfather has agreed to let me stay in Rodu. I have received the order. She nodded slightly. What do you think is the possibility of a war between the two realms? Vicky suddenly looked at She and asked, If it was 100 years ago, the possibility would be 0. The underground city could easily complete the beheading operation of the various races on the Norland continent and nip the war in the bud. What about now? Now, the Norland continent has one more extraordinary being. He has just gathered all the races on the Norland continent and completed the seal of the Great Old Ones. He has extremely high prestige and personal charisma, and he knows and is on guard against our underground city. She's expression was a little complicated. The Elven Queen's death is enough for him to prepare for a war between the two realms. Alex? He was at the scene of the Elven massacre and killed that mecha on the spot. As expected of him, Vicky's eyes sparkled. She glanced at her with a strange gaze. Ahem. I mean, his strength has indeed reached the extraordinary realm. It seems like he didn't go all out on the ice field. No, his strength is increasing. He's still getting stronger. She sighed softly. Moreover, he's only 30 years old. It's a pity that he's already married and has a child. Vicky sighed as well. Take care of yourself. If there's an emergency, contact me at any time, she said and boarded the spaceship to leave. It would be terrible if there was a war. Vicky muttered to herself as she went downstairs. The actors had not woken up yet, but there was a figure moving in the darkness on the stage. A thief. Vicky hid behind a stone pillar and fixed her eyes on the stage. It was not a thief, but a girl. To be precise, it was Angela. Was she practicing on the stage right now? Although she lowered her voice, Vicky could still tell that she was singing the lines of Miss Blackcat and was playing the role of the female lead. I didn't expect her to be so diligent. Vicky was a little surprised, but she still appreciated Angela's efforts. Angela performed the female lead scenes in full and Vicky nodded repeatedly as she watched. Although there were still some problems with her singing, Angela was able to hold up the stage in terms of acting. She was indeed talented. Angela sat by the stage and sighed faintly. "Si, when can we go back? The food here is terrible. If it wasn't for the leader's good looks, I wouldn't be able to stay here." End of chapter. Chapter 24:08. Have you learned how to make sour and spicy shredded potatoes? I went back and made it twice, but it was overcooked. My father finished them all and said it was pretty good. I made it 3 times and succeeded once, but it was still a little too sour. Then you should put less vinegar and wait until the pot is hot before adding oil. That way, it won't overheat the pot. At the entrance of the practical training center, the children who were waiting for class were gathered together and discussing their cooking tips. "Farah, you must have done very well, right?" Baker walked to Farah, who was alone in the corner. "No, I only learned how to make sour and spicy shredded potatoes. I'm not good at salt and pepper potatoes." Farah smiled shyly. "You've even learned how to make salt and pepper potatoes?" Teacher Meg only mentioned it briefly. Baker looked at Farah in surprise. Baker's voice attracted the children's attention, and their gazes fell on Farah. Farah was not used to being stared at by so many people. She nodded with a slightly red face. "Yes, I thought it was quite interesting, so I went back and tried it myself, but I didn't do well." The children's gazes were filled with admiration and envy. After all, most of them could not even make sour and spicy shredded potatoes, but Farah had already started to make salt and pepper potatoes. "Why are the children here so early today?" Meg stopped his bicycle in front of the practical training center with Mia on it. He looked at the children standing at the entrance and said with a smile, "Hello, Teacher Meg." "Hello, Teacher Mia." The children greeted her enthusiastically, and the love and respect in their expressions were so pure. Perhaps before this, their love for cooking classes mostly came from the delicious food they could taste in class. But after cooking for their families, there were some subtle changes in their mentality. The affirmation and expectation from their families, as well as their own desire to do better, all made them have different thoughts about learning how to cook. Of course, it also made them more aware of the gap between themselves and Teacher Meg. The food that Teacher Meg cooked was so delicious that it made people cry, but the sour and spicy shredded potatoes they made were so sour that they cried. "Come in." Meg also felt the subtle changes in the children, and the smile on his face deepened. Everything required a source of motivation. For children of this age, it was not easy to establish a sense of purpose in their work, but it was not so difficult for them to find the meaning of doing it. This was also one of the reasons why he assigned homework. Now, it seemed that the effect of this homework had met the requirements. Soon after, the bell rang. It was time for class. Before class starts today, I want each of you to make a serving of sour and spicy shredded potato. I will observe your cooking process and taste the sour and spicy shredded potato you make, Meg said to the children. When the children heard this, they immediately became nervous. "Teacher, is this a test?" a child asked. "To all of you, this is a test. You can also call it test." Meg smiled and nodded. "I will give you a score based on your performance and rank you." Meg did not agree with the so-called happy education. This kind of thing did not work in the middle class, let alone these children who were struggling to make ends meet. Therefore, he wanted these children to clearly understand their own standards and work hard to climb up the rankings. The cruelty of the school scores was much gentler than hunger. Hearing Meg's words, the children looked nervous with some expectations. "Well, the test time is 15 minutes. The potatoes and seasonings have all been prepared for you. Now start." Meg's voice fell, and the clock on the wall began a 15-minute countdown. Each child got 4 big potatoes, which meant that they had a chance to start over. But this was based on the premise that they were fast enough. The potatoes were washed, then peeled and shredded. Peeling potatoes was a test of knife skills. The stability of the hand was the key to whether the thin potato skin could be peeled. Meg held a list in his hand and walked around the classroom. His eyes swept over the rows of potatoes in the children's hands. During this period of knife practice, these children had gradually gone from being unable to hold a knife steadily to being proficient. However, they still needed a long period of practice to reach the level of proficiency. For example, the little fat demon named Peter, the potato skin he peeled was no more than 1 centimeter long. Between thin and continuous, he chose thin, but the efficiency was greatly reduced. The student next to him chose continuous, and the thick potato skin he peeled made the potato slimmer. Meg passed by expressionlessly and continued to observe the performance of the other students. When he passed by Beck, Meg paused for a moment. This youth, who was generally shorter than the other students, had found a balance between thin and continuous. His hand speed was not fast, but it was stable. The potato slices were not thin, but not too many potatoes were wasted. 2 potatoes were just enough to stir-fry a plate of hot and sour shredded potatoes. Not bad. Looks like you practiced seriously at home. Meg nodded slightly. It was indeed easier for teachers to have a good impression of diligent children. On the other side, Meg stopped in front of Farah's stove. The potato spun lightly in Farah's hand, and a thin, translucent potato skin spiraled down. Yes, a potato skin. The peeled potato was golden, smooth, and delicate. There were no fingerprints at all. At this level, she could totally go to Amy's and work directly. Is this talent? It really makes people envious. Meg sighed in his heart. The peeled potato was placed on the chopping board. Farah took out the Chinese kitchen knife from the knife rack and began to shred it. Tuck, tuck, tuck. A light and rhythmic sound rang out. The 2 potatoes were soon turned into a plate of shredded potatoes and then soaked in a plate of clear water. Meg continued to pass by. This girl's knife skills were becoming more and more skillful. He had stood her up this weekend because of the elves, so he had wasted a free labor force. The shredded potatoes were quickly cut. Although their standards were different, they still started to cook. Meg returned to the podium. As the shredded potatoes were put into the pot, the fragrance gradually rose. However, a situation soon appeared. A burnt and sour smell began to spread, and the smell gradually became more complex. Meg frowned and looked at the shredded potatoes in the special pot that were gradually turning black. Although sweat was dripping from his forehead, he still kept the fire on. It was as if as long as he stir-fried fast enough, the pot would never burn. Farah was the first to finish cooking. Her excellent knife skills bought her a lot of time, and she only took 5 minutes to finish the hot and sour shredded potatoes. She looked at her classmates who were still working hard, and then looked at the salt and pepper beside her, as well as the remaining 2 potatoes. After a slight hesitation, she picked up the remaining 2 potatoes and began to peel them. Chapter 2409. Cooking was actually not difficult. What was difficult was mastering cooking and making delicious food. The children finished cooking the hot and sour shredded potatoes one after another. Plates of shredded potatoes of different grades were brought to the podium and arranged according to their student numbers. There was only one portion that was fried until it was black. Meg did not need to look to know that it was from Peter, a lad who refused to reduce the heat even when the ingredients were discolored in the pot. It was very common for the shredded potatoes to stick together and have a slightly burnt smell. This was the result of pursuing speed and not seriously following the steps of removing starch with water. Heat control was also very important. Of course, there were also products that were very well completed and looked very good. For example, Farah's shredded potatoes were golden yellow in thickness and had a slight oily sheen. They were distinct from each other and did not stick together at all. They looked refreshing and bright and were not inferior to the ones he made himself. Meg took out a bowl of rice from somewhere and began the most intense-tasting segment. The children stared at the podium with a sense of nervousness, as if they were waiting for the results to be announced. Meg did not taste the dishes according to their student numbers, but according to the order in which they were cooked. Farah's shredded potatoes were already slightly cold, but the taste did not become too bad because of this. The sour and spicy taste intertwined on the tip of the tongue, stimulating the taste buds. The soft and crispy shredded potatoes were still in their best edible state. A mouthful of shredded potatoes paired with a mouthful of rice tasted wonderful. Farah, 100 points. Meg announced on the spot. Whether it was the knife skills, the cooking process, or the final presentation of the finished product, Farah did it all the best. What was a benchmark? This was a benchmark. Full marks for knife skills, full marks for cooking skills, full marks for the finished product. She was the strongest among the current batch of students. Full marks. Farah is amazing. She was the first to finish, and it looks like she did it really well. The children looked at Farah with envy and admiration. Farah's excellence was obvious to all, and the children also believed in Meg's judgment and grading. Farah's mouth was slightly agape, as if she was also shocked by the score Meg had given her. However, the numerous gazes made her blush slightly. She couldn't help but lower her head, but the corners of her mouth couldn't help but curl up. Ever since she was young, she had heard a lot of insults and mockery, but she had never thought that one day she would receive such praise and affirmation. Moreover, she really liked cooking. It was a wonderful feeling to see ordinary ingredients turn into a delicious dish. It was as if they had been given a new life. Because he liked it, he cherished every opportunity to cook. Bruno, 62 points. Meg then announced the second child's score and gave his own evaluation. Your knife skills still have a lot of room for improvement, but your peeling skills are too rusty, so you have to use 3 potatoes to get 1 serving of shredded potatoes. The cooking process is generally correct, but the control of the fire needs to be strengthened. The sour taste is a little too strong, but can be further optimized. Blueno nodded humbly. He was not discouraged by Meg's harsh words. Instead, there was a firmer will in his eyes. Meg gave the score and evaluation while tasting. The score was obtained by adding 3 aspects: knife skills, cooking, and finished product. Meg's evaluation was very straightforward. He praised the good parts, pointed out the bad parts, and corrected the things that should be corrected. The strength of the children was better than Meg expected. At least, there was no scene of crying on the spot because of the score and evaluation. Pete, 30 points. Mag looked at the black shredded potatoes and finally put down his chopsticks. He looked up at the blushing Peter and said in a meaningful voice, "Peter, cooking is a very flexible thing, and the chef has to constantly adapt to the situation. This stove is able to adjust the fire intensity. When you discover that the fire intensity is too high, simply increasing the speed of stir-frying won't work. You can just adjust the fire intensity slightly, and the problem will be solved." You can actually adjust the firepower? Peter looked surprised. That day when the teacher was explaining how to use the stove, you seemed to be taking a nap? The student next to him whispered, "I know I was wrong, teacher." Pete's face was even redder. "Okay, today's small test ends here." Meg looked at the children and said with a smile, "This score represents your current level. Of course, it is only for now. Students with low scores, don't be depressed. This means that you still have a lot of room for improvement. Students with high scores, don't be arrogant. If you stagnate, students who work hard will easily surpass you. This kind of test will be conducted after every dish that I teach you. Students who fail each time, I will give you a week to continue practicing. I will also agree to take a makeup test after school on Friday next week until you pass. Now, you have 5 minutes to clean up your stoves. We are about to start a new lesson." The results of this test were average. Apart from Farah, there were a few other children who scored more than 80 points. Baker scored 80 points, which was in the upper middle of the class. When the children were cleaning up the stoves, Meg turned to Farah's side and looked at the plate of salt and pepper potatoes beside her hand. He asked with a smile, "Can I try a piece?" "Yes, yes." Farah nodded and handed over a pair of chopsticks. She looked a little nervous and expectant. During the test, just now, she had finished the hot and sour shredded potatoes and also made a plate of salt and pepper potatoes. Meg picked up a piece of potato with salt and pepper and put it into his mouth. The potato was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. Paired with the fragrance of salt and pepper, it was a little like eating street food in his previous life. "Yes, not bad." Meg put down his chopsticks and looked at Farah with a satisfied gaze. He had only mentioned the method of making the dish in passing in class last week and had not demonstrated it live. He did not expect Farah to try it herself after going back, and she did it quite well. However, Meg's comments stopped there. Excessive praise for excellent students could easily make her lose friends. Thank you. Farah nodded slightly, hiding her joy in the bottom of her eyes. Mia looked at Farah from the side, her eyes also full of smiles. She had not misjudged her. This was a good girl who worked hard to improve herself. The morning class passed quickly in the midst of intense teaching. Meg's teaching pursued practicality, as well as the cultivation of the children's spirit of exploration and experimentation. After learning a few dishes from him, no matter if they opened their own restaurant or became a chef after leaving school, at least they would not go hungry. Of course, his expectations for them were not limited to this. This was the seed he had sown for the Norland continent's culinary world. He did not know how many of them could grow into towering trees in the future. In a chapter. Chapter 2410. After the lunch service, Meg and the system discussed the renovation of the restaurant. The basic style remained the same, but they changed some of the electrified products to localize them. They removed the omniscient door and replaced it with oil lamps that could last forever. The underground city had not given him a clear answer yet, but the long silence meant that they might send someone of a higher level than she to Chaos City. Meg had already shown his strength, so he could not rule out the possibility of a supernatural powerhouse coming. The system's technology level was lower than the underground cities, so it was best to put away those convenient little things first. Otherwise, he would be in a very strange technological level. It was beyond the steam civilization of the Norland continent and had not reached the advanced civilization of the underground city. It was awkward. System, how's the research on the mecha? Meg asked in his mind as he packed up and returned to the study. The preliminary replication preparations have been completed, but there is a technical gap in the materials and craftsmanship. A solution has not been found yet. The system's voice sounded. The materials and craftsmanship are stuck. Doesn't that mean you're wasting your time? Meg shook his head. This meant that he had given up on the idea of replicating a demigod-level mecha. In the mechanical industry, materials and craftsmanship were very difficult to break through. To create a shell material that could withstand a demigod-level powerhouse's attack, one could imagine the complexity of the craftsmanship. However, the system could replicate the mecha's blueprint, so it was not completely useless. Judging from how much she valued this mecha, this thing could be considered a high-tech product in the underground city. As for what kind of bargaining chip it could be, it remained to be seen. Anyway, he would not hand over the mecha's remains so easily. Although the core was destroyed, the mecha was still in good condition. The sharp sword had cut it in half. The cut was clean, and there was no second damage. If it fell into the hands of a mechanical research institute with a similar level of technology, the possibility of replicating it would be very high. Although I can't make a breakthrough in the materials and craftsmanship, I found an alternative with the existing materials. Although the mecha's strength is not at the demigod level, its strength is comparable to a 10th-tier powerhouse. The system's voice sounded again. Mag's eyes lit up when he heard that. A 10th-tier powerhouse wasn't a nobody. They were the most powerful beings on the Norland continent, and there were probably less than 1,000 10th-tier powerhouses in all of the races on the continent. If the system could produce 10th-tier powerhouses in an assembly line, the benefits to the Norland continent would be self-evident. Are you serious? It's only been 2 or 3 days since you switched from an agriculture major to a mechanical major, and you're already able to build your own grade 10 mecha? Meg asked in disbelief. Nonsense. This system is a gourmet major with a minor in agriculture and machinery. Do you know how much knowledge is needed to build a farm and ranch? Machinery, construction, animal husbandry. These are all things that can only be done with a very strong, comprehensive ability. All right, then why don't you build a level 10 mecha for me to see? Let me see if it's really that strong. Meg still had a look of disbelief on his face. This system rejects. The system said decisively. Are you short of funds? Meg asked leisurely. How did you know? The system wasn't very confident. Tell me, how much does a level 10 mecha cost? I'll invest in this project. Meg waved his hand in a forthright manner. According to this system's calculations, the cost of the first level 10 mecha is around 5 billion copper coins, the system quickly replied. Meg was silent for a while before asking, "Are you building an aircraft carrier?" In a sense, building a level 10 mecha from scratch that can move autonomously and fight with the most powerful beings on the Norland continent is more difficult than building an aircraft carrier, the system replied in a serious manner. Meg was silent for a while, but he agreed with the system's words. The technology that the system was talking about wasn't the technology that existed on the Norland continent, but the technology that it had mastered. The Norland continent didn't have a mature supply chain, so the system had to build a supply chain from scratch. This was the real big project. Even so, 5 billion copper coins was still a huge sum for Meg. At this moment, the figure of the hill flashed across Meg's mind. Only a real, super rich woman like her would think that 5 billion was a small sum, right? Lower the budget. 2,500,000,000, Meg said with a frown. 3 billion, no less, the system said firmly. Meg was silent for a while before saying, "What were you planning to do with the 2 billion that was deducted?" The system was also silent for a while before replying, "Wasn't it prepared for you to bargain?" Fuck. In the end, Meg and the system reached a deal of 3 billion for the level 10 mecha. The system would build a mature production chain for the level 10 mecha and deliver the first 10th tier level 10 mecha. The price of the level 10 mecha would be reduced by more than 50% in the future. The specific reduction would be calculated according to the system's cost. 1,500,000,000 for a 10th tier powerhouse. If this price was put out, all the races on the Norland continent would fight over it. Those rich people would probably want to have 2 10th tier bodyguards for themselves, and the kind that would never betray them. However, to Meg, this was not as cost-effective as a business deal. These mechas were built for the system to look after its vegetable garden. He had no use for them at the moment. However, if he really went against the underground city, these hidden trump cards would become very important. System, I want to see the first mecha in a month, Meg said. Even the donkeys in the production team wouldn't dare to rush you like this. The system said angrily. The donkeys in the production team aren't as good at bragging as you. Anyway, you only have a month, so it's settled, Meg said decisively. There was no room for negotiation. 3 billion was not a small sum. Meg counted his wealth. The restaurant's turnover and the money he got from the few times he went on a fishing expedition only added up to 1,500,000,000. Moreover, most of this money was in Irina's hands. 3 billion is too much for a hero. Meg sighed and went downstairs. If you're in trouble, find a rich woman. System forum. Trading board frowny face trading post. Boss of the DIY section. Look over. One custom-made mecha toy. The detailed blueprint and requirements are in the attachment below. The custom-made price is 500 million system coins. Chapter 2411. Mr. Meg is a busy man. Why do you have time to come to the bank all of a sudden? The Hill smilingly asked Meg, who was sitting opposite her, with a cup of freshly brewed hot tea beside her. To be honest, I'm short of money, so I thought of Miss Hill immediately, Meg said with a smile. The Hill was slightly taken aback. Her smile deepened, and she said, Mr. Meg is a rising star in Chaos City recently. If you're short of money, then you must be doing something big again, right? Miss Hill is indeed smart. I do have a big project to do recently. Meg nodded honestly. The Hill's eyes glowed, and she revealed an interested expression. May I know what project Mr. Meg is going to do? How much funds do you need? Miss Hill should know about it. It's the project to commercialize the color printing on a large scale. It requires about 1 billion copper coins. Meg took out the speech that he had prepared beforehand. The Hill was deep in thought. She had talked to Meg about working together in the color printing industry, but Meg rejected her. The huge market for color printing was undoubtedly huge. It could be seen from Meg's batch of highly sought-after color printing picture books. Having exclusive control of the color printing technology would bring about huge profits. However, 1 billion copper coins was not a small sum. Mr. Meg, do you want to borrow it? Or do you want me to invest in it? The Hill asked with a smile. Meg took a sip of tea and also smilingly said, I intend to sell 1/3 of the ownership of the steam engine to Miss Hill at a price of 5 billion copper coins. I wonder if Miss Hill would be interested? 5 billion copper coins for 1/3 of the ownership of the steam engine? The Hill was slightly taken aback before she fell into deep thought. The steam engine was a product of the Norland continent. The series of mechanical equipment driven by the steam locomotive and the steam engine was enough to overturn the current inefficient manual manufacturing industry and allow the industry to enter a stage of rapid development. The Night Elves textile factory had already proven the efficiency of the machinery and allowed Chaos City to become an important production area for textiles in just a few months. Steam locomotives driven by steam engines had already started to operate regularly between Chaos City and Vic Mountain and had become the lifeline of the transportation between the two places. Railways were being laid out in all directions with Chaos City as the starting point. Just the day before yesterday, she had already reached an agreement with the Roth Empire to jointly build a railway line between Chaos City and Rodu. It was estimated that it would be officially open to traffic next year. Meg was the creator of the steam engine. He had 1/4 of the shares in the steam locomotive project and half of the shares in other applications of the steam engine, which was comparable to Buffett Banks. It could be foreseen that in the future, when steam engines were widely used, this would be an unimaginable wealth. And now, Meg planned to use 1/3 of it to convert into 5 billion copper coins. Are you sure you want to sell 1/3 of the steam engine patents to me? The Hill looked at Meg and seriously said, with our relationship, if you need 1 billion copper coins, I won't reject you no matter if it's a loan or an investment. I don't like to owe people money, nor do I like to owe people favors. If Miss Hill is interested, we can sign the contract now. If not, I'll have to find another buyer. Meg said calmly. If he only needed 1 billion, he could just borrow it from Amy. There was no need for him to sell it. Since Mr. Meg has the intention to sell, I represent Buffett Banks to buy this portion of the shares. However, 5 billion copper coins is not a small sum for our bank. We need 3 days to withdraw the cash. I can write you a check first, the Hill said decisively. 5 billion copper coins sounded like an astronomical figure, but it was only a month's profit for Buffett Banks. The Hill was confident that she could make this deal several times more profitable. All right, then it's settled. Meg nodded. Very few people on the Norland continent could raise 5 billion copper coins in cash in 3 days. The Hill's secretary drafted the contract quickly. Meg transferred 1/3 of the steam locomotive shares and 1/3 of the steam engine shares to Buffett Banks for 5 billion copper coins. Happy working with you. Meg left the bank with 5 billion copper coins in his hand. He had already agreed with the Hill that he would withdraw 3 billion copper coins in 3 days. Buffett Banks would prepare sufficient cash for him in advance. Meg hadn't mentioned the steam engine shares to Irina yet. The remaining 2/3 of the shares could be converted into at least 10 billion copper coins. What a generous stash of private funds. Unfortunately, if it were to be exchanged for advanced mecha, it would only be 5. Meg couldn't help but feel a little melancholy. The amount of money needed to create an iron army was really an astronomical figure. At Buffett Banks, a middle-aged shopkeeper with a beard looked at the Hill with a worried expression. Miss, we have already invested 30 billion in the construction of the railway. According to the current plan, we need to invest another 100 billion. According to the current calculation of the freight cost of the steam locomotive, I'm afraid it will take 106 years for us to recover our investment. Now we are spending another 5 billion copper coins to buy the shares in Meg's hands. The railway is a basic construction, and it's still in the trial operation stage. It's wrong for you to use this data to calculate the cycle. The Hill shook her head with a smile. The freight trains will continue to increase in frequency as the operation improves. The passenger trains have also started testing. Of course, this is just a small amount of money. What can really allow us to recover our investment quickly is the few mines we bought from the goblins before the railway opened. The freight trains reduce the cost of freight. With the railway connecting to the dwarves, it will bring us a vast market and rich returns. The smooth flow of traffic made it so that there was no difficult business in the world. And by controlling this lifeline of traffic, there will naturally be more choices. The world is so colorful, and you only see the layer in front of you. The shopkeeper opened his mouth, but was speechless. He silently retreated. 5 billion copper coins. What is he trying to do? I can't figure it out, but I can't help but look forward to it. The hill looked out the window with a slight smile. Is this Chaos City? Compared to 100 years ago, it's really changed a lot. In the Aiden Square, a middle-aged man in a black and gray robe looked around with emotion. He was burly, comparable to the demons passing by. He had a square face that gave off a dignified aura. Judging from his attire, he seemed to be a businessman. A few meters behind him, there were two young men in black attire. They were looking around vigilantly. One of them had his hand on his waist, and it never left his waist. Is it there? The middle-aged man saw the long line in front of the restaurant from afar. He was a little surprised. There's a long line. Is it really that popular? Chapter 24:12. Ferdinand walked towards the restaurant in the corner of the square. Mamie's signboard was rather eye-catching, but it didn't seem out of place. Among all the gaudy signboards in the Aiden Square, it stood out a little. The scale of the restaurant wasn't big. It had 4 storefronts and seemed to be divided into 2 dining themes. There were hundreds of people lining up outside the 2 areas. Ferdinand thought for a while and queued at the back of the line. She reported some information about the most powerful person on the Nora continent and provided the restaurant's coordinates. His identity as the restaurant's owner had surprised him, but he quickly understood. In the underground city, there were also some powerful people who liked to live with ordinary identities. A restaurant owner could be considered as a rather leisurely identity. However, along the way, this restaurant's business was obviously the most popular. He didn't expect that not only was he powerful, but he also had an amazing talent in business. Ferdinand stood at the back of the line and looked at the crowded line in front of him with a smile on his lips. He couldn't remember the last time he queued up. When he was a child, that didn't seem to be the case. Since he was young, no one dared to queue before him. 800 years ago, he came to the Nora continent for the first time as an observer. At that time, the Nora continent was still in the midst of an intense racial war. Killings were everywhere, and hatred and blood filled the entire continent. After that, he would visit the Nora continent every 100 years and witness the disappearance of many races in the tragic war. All the major races gradually had a relatively fixed territory. 100 years ago, the 7 major races of the Nora continent reached an armistice agreement and signed a peace treaty to end the racial war that had lasted for thousands of years. In just a short 100 years, the Nora continent had undergone earth-shattering changes. When the battleship was flying at a low speed previously, he saw many cities standing on a vast land. There was no smoke and war, and all the races were living and working in peace. It was a scene of prosperity. What surprised him even more was the appearance of railway tracks on the land. The steam locomotives that appeared in the underground city in ancient times, and they were traveling between the mountains with a full load of iron ore. This meant that they were about to enter a new era. War is indeed poison. It will only destroy all beauty and imagination. Only peace can improve the whole world. Ferdinand looked at the team in front of him, which was a mix of different races, but in an orderly manner. 100 years ago, this would have been unimaginable. The current Chaos City was like a miniature version of an underground city to him. Though there was a huge difference in technological standards, the races coexisted equally and lived orderly lives under the management of rules and regulations. It wasn't much different from the dungeons. Queuing was a very boring thing, but Ferdinand, who rarely experienced queuing, found joy in the conversations of the customers. These guests seemed to have different identities. There were valiant mercenaries, big-bellied merchants, and dignified rich ladies. But what was interesting was that when they were in the same line, they would passionately discuss a certain dish in the restaurant. They would argue with each other until their faces turned red, but they still maintained some restraint and did not use their fists. Is the food in this restaurant really that magical? Why is it so fascinating? Ferdinand thought to himself. It seemed like this Mr. Mag had found himself a rather good chef. Moreover, he also heard a few dishes that were frequently mentioned from the crowd, such as tofu pudding, eggplant with garlic sauce, and red braised pork. Perhaps he could try them later. Not long after, the restaurant's door opened slowly, and a young man walked out with a smile. "Welcome to Mamie's." "It's him." Ferdinand stared at the young man standing at the entrance of the restaurant. He looked the same as the photo that she sent back. He was younger than Ferdinand had expected, as his bone age was only around 32 years old. His ability was indeed close to the transcendent level, which was the so-called half-transcendent level in the underground city. To have such ability at such a young age, he was miles ahead of the geniuses in the underground city who relied on genetic drugs. He was also much stronger than when he was the same age. This was the abandoned Norland continent. For thousands of years, no one had broken through to the transcendent level. Even those who were half-transcendents could be counted on one hand. This young man in front of him seemed to be a possibility. He already knew about the existence of the underground city, and had started to consciously want to trade with the underground city. He was a very bold and interesting young man. Almost at the same time, Meg's gaze passed through the crowd and landed on Ferdinand. "Is this the representative sent by the underground city?" Meg raised his eyebrows slightly and became more cautious. He felt pressure from this man. It was a feeling that he only felt when facing Cthulhu. It belonged to another level of power. This is a god, or an extraordinaire. Meg's heart sank. He did not expect an extraordinaire from the underground city to come and talk to him. Moreover, the power of an extraordinaire had already exceeded his expectations. He originally thought that with his current demigod level, he could sit down and talk to an extraordinaire from the underground city. Now, it seemed that he was still taking things for granted. Even if he used all his trump cards, Meg did not have any chance of winning. Meg's gaze met with Ferdinand's for a short, while before they tacitly looked away. "Since I can't beat him, I'll conquer his stomach first," Meg thought to himself as he greeted the customers familiarly. Ferdinand followed the group and walked forward at a moderate pace while observing Meg's words and actions. This young man really piqued his interest. The customers called him Mr. Mac familiarly. This name was used frequently in the queue. When it was mentioned, it was often with a hint of resentment mixed with fondness. Therefore, he was the owner of this restaurant and also the chef of this restaurant, the most powerful person on the Norland continent. Not only did he open a restaurant, but he also cooked for his customers and remembered the names and nicknames of every customer. "Interesting." Ferdinand came to Meg and stood still slightly in front of him. "Friend, you look a little unfamiliar." "It should be your first time here," Meg said with a smile. "Yes, I'm Ferdinand. I'm here because of the reputation." Ferdinand nodded with a smile. "Please come in." Meg nodded with a smile. He did not know what this name meant, but he knew that the so-called because of the reputation should be different from the other customers. Ferdinand walked into the restaurant and first glanced at the waitresses on both sides. This 8th tier Frost Dragon's bloodline is pure. That 8th tier spatial magic caster over there should have the bloodline of the Moon Nation's royal family. After a casual glance, he felt that there was nothing wrong. Shouldn't a restaurant opened by the most powerful person be like this? End of chapter. Chapter 24:13. The few young and powerful service staff reduced Ferdinand's suspicions a little. Perhaps this young powerhouse just liked to experience life, but he still maintained the style of life. Ferdinand sat down at a seat near the kitchen where he could see the scene in the kitchen through the window. Yes, a whole piece of natural crystal just to show the real-time scene in the kitchen to the guests. Has the concept of open cooking started to appear in the restaurants on the Norland continent? Ferdinand touched his chin and looked at the various neatly arranged cutlery in the bright kitchen like a soldier waiting to be inspected by the general. He couldn't help but nod. His gaze swept across the knife rack. There weren't many fancy knives on it, only a wide and thick kitchen knife. However, it was such a rectangular kitchen knife that his gaze couldn't help but linger on. This knife looked ordinary, but it was a real, godly weapon. Whether it was the craftsmanship of the blacksmith or the material of the knife itself, they were all extraordinary. From this knife, one could tell who this kitchen belonged to. He even specially forged such a godly weapon just to cook. Ferdinand's smile deepened. Young people nowadays were indeed getting more and more interesting. Meg walked past Ferdinand and sized him up without batting an eyelid. Due to the fact that this fellow was too powerful and had reached the level of a god on the Norland continent, it was hard to judge his age. Judging one's age based on appearance was a ridiculously wrong practice in the alternate world. However, from his upright, sitting posture and the murderous aura that was restrained but still intimidating, he should belong to the military. His temperament couldn't lie. Of course, this judgment was based on the fact that she also belonged to the underground city's military. Meg also didn't expect that just by detaining a mecha, the underground city's military boss would come personally. The other party came as a guest and even waited outside for more than half an hour. He didn't come straight to the door, which meant that there was room for negotiation. If there was room for negotiation, that was right. Meg was most worried that this old comrade didn't talk about martial ethics and came straight to the door to fight. If that happened, everyone in the restaurant together wouldn't be able to defeat him. System, if the negotiation fails and he wants to kill me, will you help me? Meg asked in his heart. The system was silent for a while, then said faintly, I can help you see where the feng shui is better. Scram. Meg frowned. Obviously, the useless system could not be used as a trump card. Just as Meg was thinking about how to deal with this, Ferdinand had already picked up the menu on the table and started reading it with great interest. As far as he could remember, the restaurants in the dungeon didn't have physical menus. Instead, they had electronic menus. Some restaurants even had virtual tasting functions so that the customers could choose the food they wanted. The menu was very simple. There were a few sections, and the names of the dishes were accompanied by small pictures. Photos? Color printing? Or is it painted? Ferdinand stared at those pictures for a while, and finally found traces of hand drawing. Only then did he focus his attention on the pictures. The dishes were a little complicated, and it was difficult to judge the ingredients just by looking at the pictures. However, looking at the pictures, it was quite appetizing. Ferdinand looked around and found a few dishes that he had heard the customers discussing enthusiastically when he was queuing up earlier. Hello, can I share a table? A young voice asked. Ferdinand looked up. It was a beautiful young lady who was about the same age as his granddaughter. He looked around. Sharing tables in this restaurant seemed to be a tacit agreement. Even the elves and demons who fought to the death 100 years ago could sit at the same table. So he naturally had no reason to break the rules. He nodded with a smile. Uncle, is this your first time eating at Mamie's? Judging from your attire, you shouldn't be a resident of Chaos City, right? Vivian asked with a smile as she sat opposite Ferdinand and glanced at the menu beside his hand. Yes, I'm here because of your reputation. Ferdinand nodded and couldn't help but size Vivian up. In the dungeon, those young subordinates kept quiet out of fear when they saw him, and kept a respectful distance from him. However, this young lady not only shared a table with him, but also took the initiative to talk to him. She was quite bold. Then you've come to the right place. Mamie's is the best restaurant in our Chaos City. Oh no. It should be said that it's the best restaurant on the Norland continent. Vivian said proudly. Oh, is it really that good? Ferdinand asked with a smile on his face. Of course. After all, there are restaurants everywhere, but there's only one Mr. Mac. Vivian nodded with certainty. She then lowered her voice and said, I don't mind telling you that there's no better chef than Mr. Mac in this world. You know about it too? Ferdinand was a little surprised. In the information that she provided, Meg should have concealed his identity. Of course, although he never shows his talents, I've known about it for a long time. Vivian lifted her chin slightly. You don't know what he's done. Otherwise, you'd definitely admire him too. Ferdinand thought about the information that she gave him and recalled Meg Alex's legendary life. He couldn't help but nod in agreement. It's indeed admirable that he could do all this at his age. That's right, that's right. Other than Mr. Mac, who else can make grilled fish so delicious? The hot pot is even more ridiculous. It's a 9-grid way of eating. It's simply the perks of being single. And in that, Vivian familiarly introduced some of her favorite dishes to Ferdinand. Ferdinand was stunned for a while before he realized that they were not talking about the same topic. However, this young lady was quite interesting. She reminded him of little Vicky. He had to visit her after dinner. "Sir, what would you like to order?" Mia came to the table and asked with a smile. "A set of red braised pork, an insanely spicy grilled fish, a set of eggplant with garlic sauce, and a set of savory tofu pudding," Ferdinand said. The red braised pork was mentioned in Xi's report. The remark was a delicious and unique food. The spicy grilled fish couldn't resist Vivian's enthusiastic recommendation, and the insanely spicy was also recommended by her. She said that all real men had to eat insanely spicy. As for the eggplant with garlic sauce and tofu pudding, he ordered it with the intention of trying it out. "All right, please wait a moment." Mia nodded and turned to the next table. Meg, who was busy in the kitchen, heard the conversation outside the door and raised his eyelids. Although Vivian's licking made him feel good, was she serious about recommending insanely spicy to a guest from the underground city? He didn't even dare to recommend this to Xi and Vicky. However, he was the one who ordered the dishes, so Meg naturally wouldn't say anything. After all, it wasn't his chrysanthemum that would be ruined the next day. Is there only one chef in this restaurant? Ferdinand couldn't help but ask curiously as he watched Mag, who was moving between the stoves skillfully and elegantly after he had placed his order. This was a little different from a #1 powerhouse on the Northern continent in his imagination. Chapter 24:14. In the kitchen, Meg's culinary skills were as smooth as flowing water, and Ferdinand was a little amazed. Just like an artist's brush and ink, the colorful side dishes were being stir-fried in the iron pot, and a bunch of meat skewers were being tossed around on the grill. The small clay pot at the side was steaming, and in the blink of an eye, a braised chicken was scooped out of the big pot at the side. A single person's kitchen was carrying the different requests and expectations of hundreds of customers. But even so, he still appeared to be very calm and at ease. Ferdinand initially thought that Meg opened this restaurant for fun, but now it seemed that he was wrong. He was serious about it. Among all the chefs he had met, none of them could be mentioned in the same breath as him. Watching him cook was a kind of enjoyment. Dishes were brought out from the kitchen one by one and placed on the customers' tables. Ferdinand, who was sitting at the entrance of the kitchen, smelled all kinds of fragrances. Those appetizing dishes gave off a shockingly wonderful aroma. Even someone like him, who didn't have much desire for food, couldn't help but swallow his saliva a few times. "Although I can sit here and watch Mr. Mac cook, it's really a form of torture to watch other people's dishes pass by me," Vivian said softly. Ferdinand nodded in agreement. He then smiled at Vivian and asked, "Pardon me for asking, but what do you do for a living?" "Me? I'm a teacher at Hope School," Vivian said with a faint smile, but she couldn't hide the pride in it. "Teaching and educating people. Respectable, respectable." Ferdinand was a little surprised, but he liked Vivian even more. If that last Vicky was half as obedient as her, she wouldn't have run away from home and not contacted her family for a year. "Uncle, what do you sell? Are you from Rodu?" Vivian also asked with a curious expression. "Yes, I'm in the ironware business. I'm on my way to the dwarves to get some supplies, and I passed by Chaos City, so I specially came to try this restaurant," Ferdinand said with a nod. Vivian smiled and said, "I see. I heard that the railway leading to Rodu and the Dwarven territory is already under construction. After the mechas are unblocked, you'll be able to transport your ironware back to Rodu via the railway. That'll be a lot more convenient. I've heard of this railway too. It said that it's a big iron bull that doesn't need to eat grass. Who invented such a magical thing?" Ferdinand asked curiously. On the way here, Ferdinand had already seen the expanding railway lines on the Northern continent. Whether it was the invention of the steam locomotive or the rapid laying of the railway, they were all carried out in the short span of a year. The technological maturity was astonishing. Ferdinand even suspected that stowaways from the underground city were involved and had given them the technology. "Well, I'm not too sure about that either. I think the person who invented this miraculous thing must be a prodigy like Boss Mag." Vivian looked at Mag in the kitchen with admiration in her eyes. "By the way, Mr. Mac and I are colleagues. He's also a teacher at Hope School. He's in charge of teaching the children how to cook," Vivian added. He's also a teacher. Ferdinand was even more shocked. He was the most powerful person on the Northern continent. Not only did he open a restaurant and become the boss and chef, but he was also a teacher. Yes, Mr. Mac is very popular with the children. Vivian nodded with emotion. He's just such an outstanding person. It feels like he can do everything well. Just as Ferdinand and Vivian were chatting, their dishes were finally served. Hello, your spicy grilled fish, red braised pork, eggplant with garlic sauce, and savory tofu pudding are all here. A voice sounded beside his ear. 4 dishes floated out from the kitchen and were placed in front of him one by one. The first thing that hit his nose was the pungent, spicy grilled fish. Even someone like Ferdinand, who was used to big occasions, couldn't help but frown when he was hit by the rich spiciness. He preferred light food. He couldn't resist Vivian's strong recommendation earlier, so he ordered a portion. He thought that the little girl's taste wouldn't be too heavy. He didn't expect that he had underestimated the perverted level of the youngsters nowadays. A whole spicy grilled fish was placed on the grill, and there were all kinds of side dishes. There was a layer of bright red chili peppers on the grill. Before he even tasted it, he could already feel the malice in his throat. Don't worry, the chili peppers are just for show. You will only understand when you really taste it. The so-called perverted is used to describe deliciousness. Vivian looked at the hesitant Ferdinand and encouraged him. Quickly pick up your chopsticks and try it. Ferdinand looked at Vivian. He hesitated for a moment, but still picked up his chopsticks. He was the marshal of the underground city. How could he be frightened by a dish? After the chili peppers were removed, the crispy grilled fish skin was finally revealed. The rainbow-like colors were still faintly visible, especially the fish head and fish tail. They were still beautiful. The dark red sauce was drizzled on the fish, covering the onions and vermicelli underneath. The tender green onions were embellished on the red. Under the heating of the alcohol stove, they were steaming like a beautiful painting. Ferdinand picked up a piece of fish. You have to dip it in the sauce to make it more soulful, Vivian reminded him. Ferdinand followed her advice and dipped the tender white fish meat in the sauce before putting it into his mouth. Spicy. After holding on for 3 seconds, Ferdinand's face finally turned red. The intense spiciness rushed into his mouth. His taste buds went from numbing to piercing pain and then to numbness. In just 3 seconds, he had experienced a stimulation that he hadn't experienced in hundreds of years. Ferdinand clenched his fist subconsciously. The power of laws in his body circulated, and only then did he manage to control his magic power that had almost loosened. This spiciness is indeed perverted. Ferdinand looked at the grilled fish in front of him and couldn't help but sigh. He was used to the bland food that his secretary had prepared for him every day. That bite of spicy grilled fish was indeed a little unexpected. However, after the intense spiciness passed, the crispy fish skin and tender fish meat began to quietly release its delicious taste. At that moment, he seemed to have seen a big fish swimming in the deep sea with beautiful colors. After swallowing the fish meat, it was as if a ball of flame had slid down his throat. A fiery feeling instantly spread throughout his body. Surprisingly, there was no more spicy stimulation in his stomach. Instead, he felt comfortable all over. Of course, this feeling didn't alleviate the spiciness in his mouth. After the fish meat was gone, his mouth was empty. The spiciness attacked him again, as if urging him to have another piece. Ferdinand could of course refuse, but this time he chose to listen to his body's decision. His chopsticks reached for the fish meat again. Chapter 24:15. In his long life of more than 1,000 years, Ferdinand had seen many geniuses, experienced countless thrilling battles, and eaten many so-called delicacies. However, the grilled fish today still subverted his inherent imagination of food. From the first taste of the insanely spicy taste in his mouth to the deliciousness after getting used to it, he could not help but indulge in the deliciousness. His chopsticks looked for fish and other equally rich side dishes among the chili, and he could not stop eating. I didn't expect there to be someone in this world who can eat the same dish as Miss Vivian. That's an insanely spicy dish. Yes, one bite, and you'll sing a song about your chrysanthemum the next day. This insanely spicy grilled fish is exactly what they mean. The surrounding customers looked at the two of them with some admiration. This was a true warrior. After eating more than half of the spicy grilled fish, Ferdinand ate half a bowl of rice to suppress the spicy taste in his mouth. His gaze fell on the red braised pork at the side. He was so focused on the red braised pork that he neglected the other three dishes. The red braised pork was served in a black pottery bowl. The cubes of pork were dyed dark red by the thick broth, and the combination of fat and lean meat looked quite tempting. This dish that once appeared in Shishi's diary also attracted Ferdinand's attention. He picked up a piece of red braised pork and put it into his mouth. The soft meat almost melted in his mouth. With a gentle bite, the sweet gravy overflowed from the meat. The lean meat was crisp and tough, dry but not dry. The skin was smooth and sticky, and the bite was vague. It was extremely wonderful. This taste. Ferdinand's eyes lit up. If the spicy grilled fish could be said to be an extreme stimulation to his taste buds and body, then this red braised pork was like a gentle little lady. It was fat, but not greasy, and it gently embraced him and comforted him. Of course, one bite was not enough. He picked up another piece of red braised pork and savored it carefully. His daily diet was balanced by a nutritionist. While taking into account the taste, he accurately calculated the nutrition and consumption of each food. In the past 1,000 years, he had indeed lived very healthily. However, at this moment, he suddenly realized that this precision seemed to have erased some things. For example, the taste that made people happy, the taste that made people excited, and the surprise that made people jump for joy. He ate different food every day, but eating was like a step in the process. There were no expectations, and there were no surprises. However, here, whether it was the spicy grilled fish or the red braised pork, they brought him incomparable surprises. In the underground city, thinkers often debated whether all the things brought by technology were good. In the past, Ferdinand had always dismissed such questions. If it was not for the convenience brought by technology, why would these thinkers who were full of food ask such questions? However, he could not help but think at this moment. The red braised pork along with 2 bowls of rice was soft and sweet, soft and fragrant. He did not feel full no matter how much he ate. However, this did not affect its taste at all. As soon as the eggplant entered his mouth, the 4 flavors of sour, spicy, sweet, and salty exploded in his mouth almost at the same time. Each flavor was so prominent, yet they blended together harmoniously, stimulating his taste buds intensely. The soft eggplant almost melted in his mouth. After experiencing a crazy taste feast, his taste buds swallowed it gently. The aftertaste lingered in his mouth, and there was an endless aftertaste. It was a vegetarian dish, but it had a meaty flavor. The flavor was so rich that it almost made him bite his tongue. It was slightly salty, so it was naturally best to go with rice. He only felt a little full after finishing 2 bowls of rice with the eggplants. Vivian, who was still seriously dealing with the spicy grilled fish, could not help but look up at him. She secretly sighed in her heart. This uncle's appetite was even more exaggerated than the orc at the next table. There was only a pile of chili left on the spicy grilled fish, and a bowl of savory tofu pudding was used to finish it off. Ferdinand let out a satisfied burp. It had been a long time since he had experienced the feeling of satisfaction brought by food. This is really interesting. Ferdinand looked up at Meg, who was still busy in the kitchen, and the smile in his eyes deepened. How could there be such a genius in this world? He had already broken through to become a half-step transcendent on the Northern continent, and he could still cook such a good dish? He had also tasted the food on the Northern continent 100 years ago. No matter which species food it was, none of them could compare to the food cooked by Meg. Ferdinand looked at Vivian, who had also just finished her grilled fish, and asked, "Miss Vivian, what time does the restaurant close?" Vivian thought for a while, and said, "I think it's 9 o'clock. "All right, thank you." Ferdinand nodded with a smile. He looked at Vivian and thought for a while. He then took out an exquisite dagger and placed it in front of Vivian. "What's this?" Vivian asked curiously as she looked at the simple yet exquisite black dagger. "This is a small token of appreciation for Miss Vivian's recommendation of the grilled fish." Ferdinand stood up with a smile. "Then, let's meet again if fate allows." "Then I'll accept it." "Thank you." Vivian didn't reject it. Ferdinand said that he was in the ironware business, so this small item that he brought with him shouldn't be anything valuable. Ferdinand paid the bill and left with a plate of red braised pork and rice. It was still early, so he wanted to go to Rendezvous to visit his granddaughter first. In the kitchen, Meg looked at Ferdinand, who was walking away slowly through the glass. He was deep in thought. Rendezvous, Black Cat Opera House. On the brightly lit stage, the opera actors were engrossed in their performance. Their outstanding singing skills made the thousands of audience members present intoxicated and affected by the plot. In a dark corner, a middle-aged man appeared silently and observed the performance on the stage. The man was Ferdinand, who had just come out from Amy's. The long distance between Chaos City and Rendezvous was completely negligible in front of a battleship. Black Cat? Isn't that her online name? This lass is already lawless enough at home, yet she still wrote such a strange plot. Ferdinand looked at Vicky, who was engrossed in her performance, with a doting smile. Ferdinand watched the opera seriously for a while and observed the expressions of the audience around him from time to time. He couldn't help but nod. However, in just a short year, her performance has improved a lot, and she has even gained the recognition of so many people. No wonder she doesn't want to go back. The final bell rang, and the lights gradually became brighter. Vicky led all the actors to take their curtain call. The audience stood up and applauded for a long time. Ferdinand also stood up slowly and clapped his hands. The last time he saw Vicky perform on stage, it seemed to be when she was 10 years old in a group performance at the school. Time flew by, and this lass had already grown so big. Chapter 24:16. The audience started to leave the venue one after another, but praises were still brought up in conversation from time to time. The novel way of performing opera was gradually becoming popular among the upper echelons of Rendezvous. The exquisite stage, the interesting story, and the melodious singing all added some color to the nightlife. Now that the venue was over, they could even have some supper and drink on Romo Street. The once desolate Romo Street rose again with the popularity of the two pubs and the Black Cat Opera House. All kinds of restaurants and entertainment businesses entered the street one after another, and it became the new business district of Rendezvous that was gradually becoming famous. Vicky watched the guests leave with a satisfied smile on her face. She used to be homeless on the streets, but now she finally experienced the feeling of having a full house. It was really not bad. Then, she noticed the figure at the back of the crowd, and her expression changed instantly. She turned around and wanted to run. "I brought you braised pork and rice. Are you sure you don't want to eat?" Ferdinand said with a smile. Vicky stopped in her tracks. She turned around awkwardly and smiled. "Grandpa, why are you here?" The audience had all left the venue, and the actors who were about to get off the stage to rest heard Vicky's words. They instantly perked up and looked at the middle-aged man below the stage. Although they were standing below the stage, everyone looked at the man in front of them with a sense of reverence. That was an aura of power without being angry. Everyone had followed Vicky for more than a year, and they rarely heard her talk about herself. However, everyone knew that their leader was different from them. She really came from a rich family, and was most likely the real-life version of Miss Black Cat. They didn't expect her family to come looking for her today. "Leader, we'll go and rest first. You guys have good chat." The actors left tactfully. Barbara, who was prepared to stay and watch the show, was also pulled away. Only Ferdinand and Vicky were left in the huge opera house. "Why? Are you not happy that I'm here?" Ferdinand said with a half-smile. "Why would I be? I'm too happy." Vicky had already accepted her fate. She immediately put on a smile and jumped off the stage. She held Ferdinand's hand intimately and said coquettishly, "I miss Grandpa so much. I don't know how much of your words I can trust now." Ferdinand shook his head, but his eyes were filled with a doting smile. Of course I'll believe everything. What bad intentions does little Vicky have? Vicky said matter-of-factly. Her gaze fell on the insulated box in his hand, and her eyes lit up. Did you go to Amy's? I went out for a meal and brought you a portion. Ferdinand handed the insulated box over. Thank you, Grandpa. You're the best. Vicky took the lunchbox. Please come to my office. Ferdinand followed Vicky through the theater and into Vicky's office. Red braised pork. It's still warm. How fragrant. Vicky opened the insulated box and immediately exclaimed. Then she lamented, It's a pity that Sister She isn't here. Her favorite dish is braised pork. Are you and she regulars at Amy's? Ferdinand sat down opposite Vicky and asked with a smile. Vicky chewed on the braised pork with her cheeks puffed up as she answered, Not really. I've only been to Amy's twice, but Mr. Mac's culinary skills are really unforgettable. It's indeed an amazing taste. Ferdinand nodded in agreement. But Grandpa, did something big happen? Why did you come to the Norland continent personally? Vicky swallowed the meat in her mouth and asked curiously. She did tell her about the semi-transcendental Mecca before, but with her grandfather's status, this kind of thing was not worth a personal visit. My precious granddaughter ran away from home for more than a year without any news. Now that I've finally found her, she's still unwilling to come home. Do you think I should make a trip here personally? Ferdinand looked at her and asked seriously. I can't leave. Vicky blushed a little. You saw today. The Opera House has just opened, and it's already received so much love from the audience. If I leave, the Opera House will close down on the same day, and my troupe members will have to go hungry. Today's performance was really good. Ferdinand nodded his head in appreciation. Vicky was instantly delighted. It was not easy to hear a compliment from her grandfather. Even her father was usually criticized. You didn't come here for that Mecca, did you? Vicky asked. She did not believe that her grandfather would make a special trip for her. It seems like she told you a lot of things. You've wronged Sister She. This is all information I got from Sister She. After all, you said that we should pay attention to current affairs at all times. Vicky quickly took the blame. The Mecca is one thing. The other thing is that I want to meet this young man, Alex. Ferdinand smiled and did not pursue the matter. Mr. Mac is a good person. Vicky said with some righteous indignation. I think some people in the buried city are too much. They cross the line and kill people. They don't care about the rules at all. Rules are set by the strong to restrict the weak. There are always some people who think that they're the ones who make the rules and naturally won't follow them. Ferdinand also restrained his smile. Does this matter have anything to do with the military? Vicky peeked at Ferdinand and suddenly felt a little nervous. Mr. Mac chopped up the half-step transcendent Mecca and even detained it. This was a clear provocation to the forces behind the Mecca. If this matter had something to do with the military, then her grandfather's personal visit this time might not necessarily be for something. We haven't found any evidence of the military's involvement yet. Ferdinand shook his head. Vicky heaved a sigh of relief. At least this meant that this matter was not instigated by her grandfather. However, I did come here this time to bring that mech back. We should be able to find out more about that mysterious organization of the Immortals from the mech. When Ferdinand mentioned the Immortals, he did not hide the disgust in his eyes. The Immortals! Vicky's expression changed. The Immortals were a very mysterious and powerful organization in the buried city. It was said that it was an organization founded by an extraordinary and had very strong power. However, no one knew where exactly they were. Even the military did not have a half-step transcendent god-level mecha, but it suddenly appeared out of nowhere and crossed the line to kill people. In the dungeon, perhaps only the mysterious organization of the Immortals had such power. I came to the Norland continent this time for another purpose, and that is to bring you back to the buried city. Ferdinand looked at Vicky. It's too dangerous here. Chapter 24:17. Meg didn't see Ferdinand outside the restaurant until the restaurant was closed for business. The other party was a man of honor. At least he didn't affect the restaurant's normal business. Mr. Meg, I'm from the underground city. Do you have time to talk? Ferdinand went straight to the point. Please come in. Meg didn't show any signs of surprise. He turned sideways to let Ferdinand, Indiana. There was no wine, only a pot of tea. The steam rising from the pot hovered between the two of them. Today's dinner was delicious. Ferdinand spoke first. Thank you. Meg nodded slightly. This compliment sounded friendly, so he didn't continue to keep a straight face. He asked, Mr. Ferdinand, what brings you here so late at night? Today's visit is firstly to apologize to the Wind Forest World on behalf of the Underground City Federation. Currently, the military is trying their best to track down the culprit. Secondly, we want exchange for that mech from you. Currently, we have limited information. If we want to find the culprit, we need more evidence, Ferdinand said politely. Were all the extraordinaires in the underground city so humble? Meg was a little surprised. Ferdinand's humble attitude almost made him think that he had the upper hand. But the other party's strength and background were far superior to his. From a moment they sat at this table, it was a completely unequal negotiation. But the other party was actually so polite. He apologized first and was willing to make an exchange instead of asking him to hand over the mech. He has a favor to ask of me. Meg's eyes flashed, but his expression was still calm. You should apologize to the elves. I can't accept it on behalf of the dead elven queen. But as the son-in-law, before the culprit is dead, I won't accept it. As for that metal lump, use the culprit's head to exchange for it. I can understand Mr. Meg's attitude. We have some leads on the culprit, but the other party's power is complicated. I'm afraid the military has been infiltrated. If you want revenge, maybe we can work together, Ferdinand said to Meg. Work together? Meg frowned. According to the current intelligence, the person behind the mech is most likely an organization called the Immortals. This organization has an ambiguous relationship with many corporations and is extremely powerful. You want revenge, and I want to eradicate this organization. Therefore, our goals are the same, Ferdinand explained. With your strength and power, why did you choose me? Meg stared into Ferdinand's eyes. He wasn't narcissistic enough to think that he was irreplaceable. The underground city had even taken out a demigod's mecha, not to mention that the other party was a real supernatural being. I need an unknown but powerful helper in the dungeon. You need a helper who can help you in the dungeon. I think we can work well together, Ferdinand said frankly. But so far, I still know nothing about you and our so-called common enemy. Meg took a sip of tea. Equality of information is the basic premise of cooperation. Ferdinand looked at Meg with admiration. This young man had great strength that did not match his age. At the same time, he also had prudence and wisdom that far surpassed his peers. I'm Ferdinand, the first marshal of the underground city's federal military. The Immortals is a mysterious organization that has existed for tens of thousands of years. They believe in immortality. The outside world knows very little about them. There should be an extraordinary in their ranks. There are also a few big corporations that have ambiguous relationships with them. They have already extended their tentacles to various sectors of the underground city, including the military. They control the most advanced technology in the underground city. Their mech technology is even a whole generation ahead of the military. The military's few operations against the Immortals were leaked in advance. It can be seen that the military is highly infiltrated. Therefore, I need to seek help from the outside world, Ferdinand said. Meg had already sat up straight. He was not sleepy anymore after hearing these words. He felt that the other party's short words hid a lot of information. The person sitting opposite him was the underground city's marshal. He was the one with the highest authority, and it was close to what he had inferred previously. In the underground city, the corporations had a lot of power. They could even influence the military. The Immortals who invaded the Norland continent and killed and robbed without restraint were very powerful. They were so powerful that even the marshal who had the power of an extraordinary couldn't get rid of them. He even had to ask for help personally. An extraordinary like you is already not someone I can deal with, Meg said honestly. Killing an enemy of a higher level was not as easy as it sounded. There hadn't been a real god in the Norland continent for thousands of years. This was already very telling. You don't have to deal with the other party's extraordinary directly. I will arrange an identity for you. You only need to help me investigate some things. With your current ability, you should be able to deal with it, Ferdinand said. What benefits can I get? After I get rid of the immortals, I will hand over the mecha operator for this incident to you. Moreover, I can provide you with an identity to enter the underground city. There you might be able to come into contact with a real extraordinary, Ferdinand said. Meg admitted that he was a little tempted. He didn't have much feelings for the Elven Queen, but no matter what, she was still Irina's mother. He should avenge her mother's death. If Ferdinand could provide him with a legitimate identity to enter the underground city, it would naturally be better than sneaking in illegally. He wanted to see if the air in the underground city was really sweeter and if he could really become a god by staying there. Meg controlled his emotions and said to Ferdinand, I need a set of detailed information about the underground city, as well as the parts of your plan that I need to carry out. I will give you an accurate answer within 3 days. All right, I will get she to pass it to you later. Ferdinand nodded. But Mr. Meg, please keep these things absolutely confidential. Otherwise, it will increase the enforcer's workload. Meg could tell that this was a threat. Don't worry, I know the rules. Meg nodded. A smile appeared on Ferdinand's face again. He picked up the tea on the table and took a sip. Then, he looked at Meg and said, Now that we're done talking about business, can I ask Mr. Mac to help me grill a set of mutton kebabs and beef kebabs? I want to pack them up and take them away. Meg stared at Ferdinand in silence for a while before asking, What's the relationship between you and Vicky? She's my granddaughter. Ferdinand smiled. In her story, you're not a good person. Meg's expression was a little strange. Children are a little naughty. Ferdinand smiled nonchalantly and said with some gratitude, I forgot to thank you for saving her life previously. I have already received my reward. You don't have to thank me anymore. Meg said calmly, but he couldn't help but curse this old fox in his heart. He deliberately waited until the matter was over before mentioning this, deliberately not wanting him to take advantage of this layer of affection. Chapter 24:18. 10 minutes later, Ferdinand paid the bill and left with the packed barbecue. Half an hour later, Mag received a bracelet personally delivered to his door by She. This is the Dungeon Identity Bracelet. It hasn't been activated yet, but the basic functions have been activated. You can check the information through the bracelet. She handed a black box to Meg. Meg took the box, and it opened automatically. A black bracelet lay quietly inside. The round bracelet looked like an obsidian bracelet. It was light and cool to the touch. When placed on the wrist, it automatically buckled and fit perfectly. Meg looked at the same bracelet on She's wrist. This thing's function was probably similar to an ID card. How do I use it? Meg asked. She reached out and tapped on Meg's bracelet a few times. The virtual projection function was activated, and a beautiful girl appeared at the same time to explain how to use the bracelet. If you need anything in the future, you can use the bracelet to contact me directly, she said to Meg and left. She was also shocked that the marshal came to the Norland continent personally to meet Meg. Moreover, the two of them seemed to have reached some kind of agreement. The gift of the bracelet meant that Meg would obtain a legal identity as a dungeon resident. She knew that she could not ask, as this was not something she had the right to know. However, this also proved Meg's value. Meg returned to the study and read the tutorial very seriously. As a human who had experienced the electronic age, his ability to accept and learn such high-tech products was quite good. The more high-tech it was, the easier it was to operate. This applied to this bracelet as well. Dungeon residents who could link their brains with computers could easily use their minds to control the bracelet and complete a series of operations. Meg did not have a chip implanted in his brain, but the real-time response of the voice control function was also very convenient and fast to use. This so-called bracelets function was actually similar to a mobile phone, but it was repackaged with high-tech technology. In addition to the most important identity verification function, the bracelet also had functions such as chatting, playing games, searching for information, and completing light tasks. Waterproof, anti-fall, long standby time. These are the basic functions. Meg played for a while and clicked on the most eye-catching file on the virtual screen. a Dungeon Chronicles, and a document marked Top Secret in red. Mag skipped over that top secret document and clicked on the Chronicles first. Grandpa, you didn't have a conflict with Mr. Mac just now, did you? Vicky asked Ferdinand as she chewed on the juicy beef cubes. No, we had a good chat, just like old friends. Ferdinand put down the bamboo skewer in his hand and picked up a lamb skewer. This method of eating is quite interesting. It's rare in the dungeon. They do have barbecue skewers in the South, but they taste a little sweet. It's nothing compared to Mr. Mac's spicy and garlic skewers, Vicky said. As a foodie, she had a complete map of the food world in her head. If Mr. Mac goes to the dungeon, what identity do you think would suit him? Ferdinand asked with a smile. A chef, of course. Is there anything more suitable for him than that? Vicky said matter-of-factly. However, she stopped chewing on the meat cubes and asked in surprise, You intend to let Mr. Mac go to the dungeon? It's just a suggestion of mine. But whether Mr. Mac will accept it or not, we still have to wait for his reply, Ferdinand said. Why do you want him to go to the dungeon? Vicky was curious. Her instincts told her that something big was going to happen in the dungeon. Oh, that. I can only tell you after it's done. Ferdinand shook his head with a smile. The two voices in Vicky's head were arguing, but she still couldn't guess what Ferdinand was planning to do. She also knew that Grandpa wouldn't reveal anything about the high-sequence Beyonder's confidential matters, so she didn't ask further. Grandpa, I still have to discuss something with you. I won't be going back with you this time. The Norland continent is actually very safe now. All the races have signed a new peace treaty, and there's peace everywhere. Most importantly, the Black Cat Opera House has just gotten on the right track, and it's time for me to shine. If I leave, the stage will collapse. Moreover, you don't know this, but this Black Cat Opera House of mine is invested in by Mr. Mac. It has the protection of the most powerful person in the world, so there's no problem at all, Vicky said to Ferdinand seriously. Ferdinand stared at Vicky for a while and nodded with a smile. I can give you another year. I will eliminate all information related to you and not tell anyone about you, including your parents. In the next year, you have to make yourself disappear completely, just like the past year. Don't let anyone in the dungeon find you. Can you do it? Vicky's eyes flashed with joy, and she nodded immediately. I will definitely do it. Keep these two things with you. If there's any danger, you must protect yourself. Ferdinand took out a lightning bead and a black battleship key and handed them to Vicky. This is the Thundership? Vicky looked at the golden lightning symbol engraved on the key, and her mouth was slightly agape. I promise to give you the Thundership during your coming-of-age ceremony. Although you're not an adult yet, the changes in the past year made me feel that you've really grown up a lot, so I'm giving it to you in advance. Ferdinand looked at Vicky with doting and loving eyes. Thank you, Grandpa. I love this gift so much. Vicky jumped up. The Thundership was the military's strongest single-person combat battleship, and it was on the same level as Sister She's. Back then, she coaxed and pestered Grandpa to agree to give her one for her coming-of-age ceremony. She did not expect to receive this gift more than a year in advance. Her battleship self-destructed in the battle with the Great Old One. Now that she had the Thundership, it would be much easier for her to freeload at Mr. Mac's place in the future. Of course, the lightning bead that contained the attack of a transcendent powerhouse was also very precious. Little girl, take good care of yourself. I'll come to see you again. Ferdinand touched her head and got up to leave. Are you leaving now? Vicky got up as well, a little surprised. I've been out for long enough. If I don't go back now, I'll be exposed. Ferdinand laughed. You're using a substitute robot? Vicky came to a realization and said with pity, I'm afraid the generals don't know that I've been carefully reporting to a robot all day. You can ask she for help if you need anything. She's a trustworthy person, Ferdinand said. Sister She and I are very close. Vicky nodded. End of chapter. Chapter 24:19. Meg pulled an all-nighter, and with his extraordinary reading ability as a demigod, he finished reading the entire Dungeon Chronicles. This should be the version that was circulated internally, because it started from when the ancestors of the dungeon migrated to the dungeon from the Norland continent. 35,000 years ago, there was a strong earthquake that caused an entire area in the southern part of the Norland continent to collapse, and the dungeon fell. The creatures in this tens of thousands of kilometers of collapsed area became the first batch of immigrants to the dungeon. The dungeon world was as vast as the Norland continent, but there weren't so many powerful races desperately trying to move in, so it was very rich in resources. After experiencing friction in the early stages, the 6 major races in the collapsed area came to an agreement and decided to develop the fertile land of the dungeon together. This was also the embryonic form of the Dungeon Federation. With abundant food and a spacious enough territory, the ancestors of the dungeon were able to reproduce and strengthen quickly. And what really made the dungeon world walk on a completely different technological path from the Norland continent was a divine monument that fell from the sky. In the 5,000th year of the dungeon calendar, the divine monument fell from the sky, and the entire dungeon world was illuminated by light. There were many mysterious runes recorded on the divine monument, and no one knew what they meant. In tens of thousands of years, the ancestors of the dungeon world comprehended the laws under the divine monument and improved rapidly. Some even broke through to become a transcendent. There were also ancestors who were enlightened by the stone monument and started the technology tree of the dungeon world. From then on, the dungeon world soared on the path of coexistence of technology and magic and walked on a completely different development path from the Norland continent. In the history of the dungeon world, the divine monument had always occupied an important position. Almost every era's geniuses and changes revolved around the stone monument. The mysterious runes on the stone monument were deciphered, and what followed was the advancement of the dungeon world civilization. This is equivalent to giving the whole world a cheat. Meg stroked his chin and pondered. In the past 35,000 years, there were a total of 480 transcendents recorded in the underground city, and 280 transcendents were recorded as having died. And in the past 10,000 years, the number of people who became transcendents was 82. In the past 5,000 years, it was 30. It could be seen that even in the dungeon, the difficulty of breaking through to become a transcendent seemed to be increasing. But even so, it was still better than the Norland continent's predicament of no one becoming a god in the past 10,000 years. Of all the masters who had broken through to the transcendent realm in the past 5,000 years, Ferdinand was undoubtedly one of the most dazzling existences. After tens of thousands of years of development, the political system of the underground city was similar to a presidential republic. The various states formed the Underground City Federation. Overall, they were unified but relatively independent. However, under the political system of the seemingly advanced civilization, the 12 major corporations already controlled most of the wealth and power in the underground city. Although the president had great power, he was often the spokesperson of the major corporations. The military was also controlled by the corporations and was a money tree for the 5 major technology companies. In such an environment, a little boy from a humble background was like a dazzling comet, crushing the geniuses of the great families and breaking through to the transcendent realm in just 1,000 years. Without the support of a major corporation, he became the first marshal of the military. At this point, the Federation's military had embarked on the path of reform. First, the control of the various large corporations was cut off. Next, the military had a high degree of autonomy. They no longer completely listened to the president. Instead, they were loyal to the first marshal. When Meg read this paragraph, he was completely stunned. Good heavens, this is a real cheat. Okay? Moreover, he was using force. How difficult was the reform of the system? Not to mention the tens of thousands of years of operation of the ancient corporations. However, Ferdinand was simply too powerful, suppressing all who refused to submit with his iron blood. He directly crushed 2 great corporate clans and killed 8 extraordinary experts, forcing the various corporate clans to pinch their noses and accept this result. Meg couldn't imagine that the middle-aged man who shamelessly asked him to grill skewers yesterday was the man who stood at the top of the underground city. As for why someone as strong as Ferdinand still wanted to cooperate with him, it wasn't hard to understand. In the history of the underground city, there were hundreds of transcendents. The corporations that had survived from the ancient times all had extremely strong foundations. The strength of some ancient transcendents wasn't weaker than Ferdinand. All parties reached a tacit understanding and balance. Under the situation where they didn't fall out with each other, seeking help from the outside world became Ferdinand's only choice. It was unknown how many people in the military who were loyal to Ferdinand were also loyal to a certain corporation. There weren't many young people like Meg who had a clean background and were strong enough. This chronicle obviously wasn't released to the public. It introduced the 10 most powerful corporations in the underground city in detail, including the companies under them and the transcendents hidden in them. After that, Meg brought up Ferdinand's plan. There was only one mission in the document: infiltrate the McCarthy family and investigate whether Armand McCarthy was involved in Counselor Tam's disappearance. Rescue Counselor Tam. Mission reward: 1 chance to study the Divine Monument. Meg was speechless. System: someone is here to steal your business, Meg said with a smile. He didn't expect this Ferdinand to be so interesting. The reward for his first personal mission was already so generous. After reading the history of the underground city, Meg naturally had a strong interest in the Divine Monument. The geniuses in the underground city studied the Divine Monument and broke through to the Transcendence realm. It could be seen that the Divine Monument was the biggest variable that widened the gap between the underground city and the Norland continent. Meg was only 1 step away now. If he had the chance to study the Divine Monument at a close distance, he might be able to gain something even if he couldn't become a god right away. The first mission gave Meg, a non-native of the underground city, a chance to come into contact with the Divine Monument. Meg felt that this Ferdinand was not bad. Of course, the McCarthy family was one of the top 10 ancient corporations. There were 3 transcendents in the family, and they had lasted from the chaotic era more than 30,000 years ago until now. Obviously, this first mission started in hell mode. As the saying went, wealth comes from danger. Meg made a decision very quickly. Host: it is theoretically possible to become a god on the Norland continent through incense, the system advised. But once you enter the underground city, the host's safety is not within the system's control. The mortality rate is extremely high. No one has succeeded in the past 10,000 years. I don't think your theory is very reliable. Meg shook his head and said with a smile, moreover, this time in the underground city, my backer is quite powerful. Wealth comes from danger. The Norland continent doesn't even have a god, so they don't have the confidence to talk to the underground city at all. Meg sent a message to She with his wristband. Tell that person that I agree to cooperate. Soon, Meg received She's reply. Okay. Meg kept his wristband and opened the study room door. Irina was standing outside with a glass of milk. She smiled and said, Have you made your decision? Chapter 24:20. For the time being, it's best if we don't talk about the underground city. Meg sent a telepathic message. I can't guarantee that they didn't leave a listening device at home. Irina nodded thoughtfully and went downstairs with the milk. The person who came yesterday is the first marshal of the underground city's military and one of the strongest transcendents in the underground city. He asked me to... Meg told Irina about his conversation with Ferdinand and the basic situation of the underground city. Ferdinand was right. The fewer people who knew about a secret, the easier it was to keep it. However, he did not intend to hide it from Irina. She was his wife and the most trustworthy person in the world. Moreover, the underground city was full of unknown dangers. He could not guarantee that he would be able to return safely after entering. He wanted to let Irina know about the general situation. Is the Divine Monument really that magical? After listening to Meg's introduction, Irina could not help but ask. That's the information they gave me. As for whether the Divine Monument is really that magical, I'll have to see it with my own eyes to know. Meg smiled. He was also looking forward to it. I still feel that this matter is a little strange. With his identity, he wouldn't need to cross the border and ask for your help to investigate a big family, right? Irina frowned. I think he's either hiding some important information or he's trying to find an easy mission for me to try out. It's similar to a newbie's mission. It's a bonus, Mag said. That was also his guess. Irina nodded slightly and said, Since you've made up your mind, I won't stop you. Be careful. Okay. Meg nodded. After the morning service, Meg went upstairs to check his bracelet. She had already sent him a reply. We'll meet 10 miles outside the West City Gate at 9 o'clock tonight for training. Do you want me to bring you a portion of red braised pork? Meg sent a message. Yes, she replied instantly. Meg smiled and put away his bracelet. This girl really could not move once she heard about red braised pork. Father, Xiao Guai wants to go out and play. When Meg came out of the study, a little dumpling ran over, hugged his leg, and climbed up. Little Guai, where do you want to go to play? Meg smiled and picked her up. He scratched the little girl's pink nose and asked, I want to play in the ocean. Mother said that the ocean is fun and I can ride sharks. I haven't seen the ocean before, little Guai said with anticipation. Weren't you born in the sea? You are the little sea king. Meg complained in his heart, but on the surface he smiled and said, The sea is very, very far from our home. When everyone is free in a few days, let's go to the sea to play together, okay? Is it very far? Little Guai pouted in disappointment. Although the sea is very far away, if Xiao Guai wants to play in the water, you can play at home. Meg carried Xiao Guai to the room at the side and asked the system to take out the big fish tank that had been removed earlier. When he opened the door of the empty room, the glass swimming pool that took up half of the room appeared in his sight. Wow, what a big bathtub! Xiao Guai's eyes lit up. She loved to soak in the bathtub with her mother every night. Unfortunately, the bathtub was too small, and she couldn't swim around happily. However, the bathtub was so big. It was as big as the room they slept in. Xiao Guai, change into your swimsuit before you can go swimming. Meg grabbed Xiao Guai, who was climbing up the spiral ladder and was about to jump into the pool. He bought a small swimsuit from the system and put it on for Xiao Guai. Swimmer 1, Xiao Guai, get ready to dive. Xiao Guai jumped into the pool and splashed the water. Did you learn this diving technique from the Philippine team? Meg wiped the sweat off his face and was a little speechless. Xiao Guai, who was in the water, was like a fish that had lived on land for a long time. After a short period of discomfort, she quickly swam happily in the pool like a fish. Moreover, her legs quickly turned into a fishtail again. It was a gorgeous, colorful fishtail. Father, look, I've turned into a fish. Xiao Guai floated to the surface and shouted at Meg in surprise. You're a mermaid, Meg said with a smile. So I'm a little mermaid. This tail is so pretty. The little girl wagged her tail and started to be narcissistic. Xiao Guai. Gina stood at the door and looked at Xiao Guai, who was swimming in the pool. Her gaze landed on Meg. Xiao Guai wants to see the sea. She might not have time to go recently, so I got her a swimming pool to play in first, Meg explained. Gina nodded. She recalled that when she first came to the restaurant, Meg had also prepared a big fish tank for her because she couldn't get used to living on land. It helped her get through the most difficult period. Mr. Meg was still a gentle and considerate person. I have to go out for something. You can come in for a tour, Meg said to Gina and then went downstairs. Boss, are you going out? Meg pushed the bicycle out from behind the counter. Phyllis, who was carrying Yai, stood up from the corner. Yai raised her little hand and greeted Meg. Yes, I'm going out for something. Meg nodded and walked to Phyllis. He reached out and pinched Yai's pink little face. Sob. 2 red marks appeared on Yai's face. Her big, watery eyes immediately glistened with tears. Don't cry. Boss is just playing with you. Phyllis quickly coaxed her nervously. Let's go. Meg pushed the bicycle and slipped away. This little girl would cry for a long time if he pinched her. Meg went to the locomotive construction factory. This was what he had promised the hill yesterday. The freight locomotive had been running successfully for some time. The passenger train had also gone through a few rounds of road testing and was ready to be launched. Before the official launch, the Hill and the engineering department hoped that Meg could help test and experience it and give some suggestions. The efficiency of the Hill and the mayor's mansion actually surprised Meg. It had only been half a year since the steam locomotive was approved to run and the passenger train was launched. Now, The railway line had been laid for thousands of kilometers. He was impressed by the infrastructure ability of the magic world. Meg arrived at the site. After experiencing the bumpy and noisy passenger train, he proposed two plans to reduce the noise and reduce the shock. Carrying people was different from carrying goods. Except for fragile items, goods didn't care about the bumpy and noisy ride. However, people had requirements for comfort. The engineers felt like they had found a treasure. They immediately held a meeting to discuss and prepare for optimization. It's a pity that even Miss the Hill couldn't get you. Otherwise, you would be the most suitable person to take over my position as the chief engineer. The chief engineer said to Meg regretfully. I'm your boss and co-founder. Meg complained in his heart. He said humbly, You're too kind, chief engineer. I'm just saying. Chapter 24-21. After the dinner service, Meg told the kids a bedtime story before leaving for his appointment with the braised pork that was just out of the pot. There was a barren mountain 5 kilometers west of the West City Gate. Meg went up the mountain with the braised pork and saw she standing by the cliff with her hands behind her back. She was wearing a white combat uniform with a warship hovering behind her. The full moon became her background, making her look lonely and out of place in this world. Are you hungry? Meg smiled as he delivered the takeout. Thank you. She took the insulated box. Although her expression was calm, she could not hide the smile in her eyes. The braised pork and delivery fee is a total of 2,500 copper coins. Cash or credit? Meg was still smiling. She's expression froze, and she looked at him seriously. You want money? Meg nodded. I don't have money. She shook her head and took out a small table and a small stool. She opened the insulated box and started eating. Meg looked at she who was enjoying her meal and frowned. Is it so natural to freeload now? Meg took a bottle of wine and sat opposite she. She moved the braised pork closer to her and continued eating. Meg was speechless. Since there were no dishes to go with the wine, Meg sat and watched she finish the braised pork. Is it good? Meg looked at she who was wiping her mouth and asked. Her culinary skills are still good. She nodded. I'm full. What are we going to do now? Meg put away his wine and looked at the warship hovering in the air. He said enviously, Let's start with warship piloting. Who didn't have an admiral dream? You don't have permission to learn warship piloting yet. She shook her head with a serious expression. Meg said, Oh, it was just a joke. Let's start with learning the official language of the underground city, she said. Don't you speak the common language of the Norland continent? Meg asked subconsciously and then realized how stupid his question was. Instead of mocking him, she said calmly, Just because we can speak the Norland continent's common language doesn't mean that we speak the Norland continent's common language. The dungeon has a completely different language system. You have to master it before you can enter the dungeon. I'm talented in languages. Meg was quite confident. After all, he was a man who mastered 8 foreign languages. It was not difficult for him to learn a new language. Just send the lessons to my bracelet, and I'll go home to learn them. Let's skip this section and start the other lessons. She thought for a while and agreed to Mag's suggestion. She nodded and said, Then, I will teach you how to drive next. Huh? So direct? Meg's brows raised. Sure enough, she took out a capsule car. To be precise, she took out a cool black flying car from a capsule. It had a wild beast-like front, a streamlined body, a black frosted body, and 2 exaggerated propellers at the back. It easily beat all the luxury cars in the garage in his previous life. Following she into the flying car, Meg leaned back in the comfortable seat and subconsciously touched the seatbelt. He touched nothing. She glanced at Meg. He did not appear too surprised. Instead, he was a little too familiar with getting into the car, like an experienced driver. This is a flying car, the most common mode of transportation in the underground city. She started to introduce the car to Meg and some of the current road rules in the underground city. The flying car has 2 driving modes. The automatic driving mode can be controlled by voice. You just need to say the location, and the flying car will drive automatically to bring you to your destination. You just need to master this mode, she said. This method of driving is soulless. I want to learn manual driving. Meg looked at the steering wheel in front of she and said seriously, Meg did not know how they managed to control a flying car that was like a miniature spaceship with a steering wheel. Out of his cautious nature, he did not want to leave his fate to the automatic driving in certain dangerous situations. Are you sure you want to learn? She tilted her head and looked at him. Of course. Meg nodded with certainty. Then take a look. She gently pressed the start button on the steering wheel. A racing seat belt stretched out from the seat and automatically buckled on Meg. The dashboard was directly displayed on the front windshield with only a simple speed and time. Meg was about to complain that the seat belt was a little too exaggerated when she stepped on the accelerator. The strong pushing force pressed the defenseless Meg against the back of the seat, and his whole body almost sank into the soft seat. In that instant, Meg saw the speed on the dashboard soar from 0 kilometers per hour to 1,000 kilometers per hour. It took about 2 seconds. The pitch-black world receded rapidly. Meg could only see the bright moon in the sky, and the speed on the dashboard was above 1,000 kilometers per hour. Yes, this thing was much faster than a high-speed rail. This was the car a man should drive. Meg started to get a little excited. She thought that this would make Meg flinch, but she turned her head and met his bright eyes. There was no intention of backing down. He looked completely excited. Keep driving. Turn, drift, spin. Meg urged. Driving in a straight line was too inoperable and a complete waste of the car's performance. Are you teaching me how to drive? She looked at him. If you keep staring at me, we're going to crash into a mountain. Meg pointed to the front. She's gaze returned to the front, and her expression changed slightly. A dark mountain suddenly appeared in front of them, and the cracks on the black cliff were clearly visible under the light. Just as Meg was considering whether to jump out of the car, she did a series of operations that left him flabbergasted. She pulled the steering wheel up, and the front of the car was lifted, forcibly pulling it parallel to the cliff. The injectors under the car suddenly exploded and quickly removed the forward momentum. In the end, the flying car was pulled up almost vertically against the cliff and was only about 10 centimeters away from the cliff at its closest point. After crossing the mountain, the moon appeared in sight again. She breathed a sigh of relief, and a smile appeared on her lips. Her operation was still stable and sharp. Is driving such an exciting thing? Meg said faintly. The smile on Shishi's face froze. She then said in all seriousness, manual driving is prone to accidents, especially when you get distracted while driving. This is the first lesson for you. You must always remember that there are thousands of roads, but safety comes first. I've learned my lesson. Mag nodded as he tried his best not to laugh. Do you still want to learn? She asked in all seriousness. Yes, Coach, I want to learn this. Meg nodded firmly. Chapter 24-22. The driving mode of a flying car was very different from a car. Whether it was the degree of steering or the excessive speed increase, Meg was not used to it. Fortunately, this car had a trainer mode and anti-collision mode. Even so, she still put on the helmet after getting in the car. Don't you have basic trust between people? Meg looked at the helmeted she and said faintly. Safety is the first principle, she replied calmly. Then, do you have an extra helmet? Meg asked. She turned her head and looked at him seriously through the helmet, wondering if she should get out of the car. I'm kidding. Sit tight. I'm going to drive. Meg grinned and pressed the start button on the steering wheel before stepping on the accelerator. The expected strong push of 1,000 miles per second did not happen. The flying car hurriedly flew forward at 60 kilometers per hour. Meg was confused. What's wrong with this car? Meg asked. To protect the student's safety, the speed limit is 60 kilometers per hour in trainer mode, she replied calmly. Driving an instructor's car is indeed boring, Meg complained, but he still began to practice seriously. After all, it was his first time driving a flying car, and it was very refreshing. Compared to a car, the flying car, suspended in the air, was more than twice as fun. After familiarizing himself with the car's performance and mastering the steering, climbing, and descending techniques, Meg drove the flying car up and down the magical Beast Mountains at 60 kilometers per hour. He suppressed his breath and teased the magical beast to chase him. He had a lot of fun. A man's happiness was that simple. She had taken off her helmet and looked at Meg with a complicated gaze. She looked at him as if he was a monster. This guy had only been in the car for an hour, and he had already mastered the driving skills of flying car. When she first learned how to drive, she was scolded by the instructor for half a month before she got her driver's license. 2 hours later, Mag stopped the car above a dense forest. He turned to look at She and asked, "Can you deactivate the coach mode now? Today's lesson is over. You can go back to language learning now," she said expressionlessly. "Can I drive this car away?" Meg asked tentatively. "This is my personal car." Meg smiled awkwardly. That was right. She did not look like the kind of woman who would drive a pink kitten car. This kind of wild car was more in line with her temperament as a ruthless sniper. "Then send me to the city gate first." Meg started the car and drove toward Chaos City. The flying car stopped silently outside the city gates. Meg jumped out of the car and watched the flying car fly away, the corners of his mouth curling up slightly. Multifunction bracelet flying car. He felt as if he had transmigrated from the world of magic to a world of steampunk. He was looking forward to the upcoming trip to the underground city. Back at the dining room, Meg went to the study after a quick wash-up. He turned on his bracelet, received the language course package from She, and started studying. The language and writing system of the underground city was completely different from that of the Norland continent. However, She sent him a language and literacy curriculum for young children. Other than the overly brainwashing nursery rhymes, it was easy to understand. 2 hours later, Meg quietly closed the cartoon literacy video. He opened the window and began to wonder why he, a demigod with a memory genius, was reading nursery rhymes and learning to read here. "Can you send me some videos for adults?" Meg turned on his bracelet and sent a message to She. 10 minutes later, Meg received a reply. "I don't watch those kinds of videos." Meg. Throughout the night, Meg had a preliminary understanding of the underground city language and writing that the young contestants needed to master through the children's literacy video. Meg felt that when he went to She's place to learn a foreign language today, it was necessary to explain the message he sent last night and asked She to give him a copy of the adult language learning materials. Looks like he should be able to adapt to life in the underground city very quickly. In the office, Ferdinand deleted She's report and continued to browse the morning papers. When his gaze fell on missing Councilman Tam case, he paused and clicked on the latest development. At present, the murderer has not been found, and no organization has admitted to planning this. However, it could be confirmed that Councilman Tam is not dead. Criminal charges. Ferdinand looked at the photo in the report. In the photo was a tall and thin middle-aged man wearing rimless glasses. He was bending over to enter the flying car. This was the last scene before Councilman Tam disappeared. Ferdinand had a good impression of this civilian councilman. The two had also met informally a few times and reached an agreement on many ideas, including weakening the privileges of the plutocrats. Due to the vicious incident that had happened previously, Ferdinand had specially strengthened Councilman Tam's security. However, he still disappeared on the way to the parliament. The robbers were very professional. Other than the bodies of the security personnel, there was no valuable evidence left at the scene. This matter had caused a great commotion on the internet. Councilman Tam had always been a supporter of the civilians and was deeply loved by them. After the disappearance case, there had been many demonstrations in various states. Kidnapping a councilman on the streets of Tucker City was an extremely arrogant move. Ferdinand knew very well that this matter must be related to the bill that Tam was going to propose in this parliament. Before he left, Tam sent him a message saying that he was prepared to be assassinated after he walked out of the parliament building. However, no one had expected that he would be kidnapped before he could even reach the parliament. Councilman Tam better be fine, or else. Ferdinand looked at the words McCarthy family that he had marked in red with a cold gaze. This was the 8th disappearance of a celebrity in the past year. Councilman Tam was not the first, and he would not be the last. During the driving lesson at night, Meg brought She a plate of braised pork. Once the instructor was satisfied with the driving lesson, she would not be far from completing her apprenticeship. Looking at She, who was eating with her head lowered, Meg also took a small stool and sat opposite her. He said, "I sent you a message yesterday. Don't misunderstand." She paused. When she thought of the message Meg sent her late last night, a trace of embarrassment flashed in her eyes. However, her expression was still cold as she said, "I told you I don't look at that kind of thing. I told you it's not that kind of thing." Meg felt that the more he said, the worse it got. This girl looks quite normal, but what's going on in her head? What I'm saying is that it's a learning video for adults. If you send me some literacy nursery rhymes, I'm going to explode from listening to it. Meg looked at she sincerely and said, "She's chewing." Movement froze. Looking at Meg's righteous face, she blushed, which was rare. Oh my God, the videos he mentioned for adults are actually serious learning videos? Chapter 24-23. Meg did not feel awkward now. So, she was the one who felt awkward. The air was quiet, and even the wind in the mountains was not as noisy as it used to be. After a minute of silence, she finally swallowed the rice and meat in her mouth. She coughed and said, "You're a beginner. These are suitable learning materials for you at this stage. Don't bite off more than you can chew. I think I can move on to the next stage of learning now." Meg spoke in the dungeon Mandarin. "You've only just started." She stopped abruptly, and her eyes widened even more as she looked at Mag. Yes, he had just spoken in the dungeon Mandarin, although his pronunciation was a little clumsy and childish, but it was the authentic dungeon Mandarin and very accurate. "I told you, I'm very talented in learning languages." Meg spread his hands and still spoke in the dungeon Mandarin. She had to admit that she fell for his act this time. "There's no need for specialized learning materials. Just help me unlock the movie library in the bracelet. I'll watch and learn on my own." Meg made a request. "How do you know there's a movie library in the dungeon?" She looked at Meg and asked, "Speaking of which, you might not know. I've been preparing to shoot a magic movie recently and hired she to be the scriptwriter. The dungeon is so much more advanced than the Northern continent. There should be many operas and movies like Miss Black Cat, right? Isn't there one?" Meg said matter-of-factly. She had to admit that Meg's answer made sense. "Okay, I'll unlock the access when we get back tonight." She nodded. Anyway, Meg would enter the dungeon soon. When the bracelet's functions were fully activated, he would be able to browse everything on the internet. With yesterday's foundation, Meg finally got she's permission to unlock the coach mode and switch to normal mode after a few rounds of trial driving. "Wait, let me out first." She looked at Meg, who was holding the steering wheel eagerly. Meg glanced at her. "Haven't you already experienced my driving skills? That's why I want to get out." She unbuckled her seatbelt and got out of the car without any hesitation. "Meg, isn't there a collision avoidance mode? Is it necessary for this girl to do that?" Meg mumbled as he closed the car door. His hands that were holding the steering wheel still felt a little warm. He took a deep breath and stepped on the accelerator. She stood at the top of the mountain and watched as a spot of light flew across the sky and bounced between the peaks, almost forming a line of light. 10 minutes later, the flying car stopped at the mountain peak. The car door opened and Meg jumped out. He looked at Shishi calmly and was about to say something when he suddenly turned his head to support himself against a tree. This was the first time that Meg threw up after learning how to drive. How should I put it? The car's acceleration was too wild, the night was too dark, and the anti-collision function was too sensitive. Since the first time he was about to hit a mountain, he could no longer turn the steering wheel. Therefore, he was flung back and forth between more than a dozen mountain peaks, and he successfully threw himself up. "Do you still want to learn how to drive?" She smiled gloatingly. The path to Qiuming Mountain was bound to be full of twists and turns. "I ate too much at night. Let's start over." Meg jumped into the car indignantly and stepped on the accelerator lightly. The car rose to an altitude of 2,000 meters. There were only a few mountain peaks in sight before he stepped on the accelerator with ease. Meg enjoyed the thrill of driving, but he did not indulge in it. Learning how to drive also had the intention of learning a life-saving skill. The speed of Xi's flying car was far beyond the speed of a level 10 powerhouse, and in a city chase, it could play an even greater role. The more he understood the underground world, the more cautious he was. Although that world was not full of extraordinaries, He believed in the principle that more skills would not be a burden. Meg drove the flying car to the Demon Islands and became a flying car bandit, ransacking the Abyss Demon Tribe's treasury. By the time the Abyss Demon Tribe's internal alarm sounded, Meg had already driven away and they did not even see the taillights. You learned how to drive for this? She looked at Meg, who got out of the car happily. She had just seen what Meg had done through the car's surveillance camera. I've always been a person who clearly distinguishes between kindness and hatred. The Abyss Demon Tribe has a grudge against me, so this is their payment for their lives, Meg said matter-of-factly. Unfortunately, after the Abyss Demon Tribe was ransacked by him and Irina many times, there were not many good things left in their treasury. After conversion, there was only 600 million, which had just been transferred to the system. She did not refute Meg's words. She had studied Meg's information and knew that the Abyss Demon Tribe did have a death feud with him. However, a few months ago, the Abyss Demon Tribe's patriarch and the Flaming Demon Tribe's patriarch fought to the death for some reason. The two tribes fought because of this and suffered heavy losses. She did not believe that Meg did not add fuel to the fire. I've already learned how to drive. What do you want to learn tomorrow? Meg asked. Guns. I'm 800 miles away now, and I can kill a Japanese with one shot, Meg said. She frowned. She did not understand what Meg was talking about. What I mean is that I've already trained my sniper rifle pretty well. Do I still need to practice my guns? Meg said seriously. A sniper rifle is just one type of gun. As a qualified agent, mastering the basics of guns is a compulsory course. She brought Meg onto the battleship and opened the door to her armory. All kinds of guns of different lengths and thicknesses hung on the three walls. They glowed with an exciting metallic luster. Meg was silent for a while. He looked at she and said seriously, You know how to make a man excited. She pondered over the meaning of Meg's words. She was trying to figure out if he meant it literally or if there was another literal meaning. Fuck, this is fucking awesome. Meg had already walked into the armory. He touched the short gun and played with the long gun. He even hugged the giant machine gun that looked like an enhanced version of the Gatling gun. He asked she, Does this thing emit blue flames? She was sure that Meg meant what he said. She shook her head and said, There will be red flames when you fire. Okay, coach. Where should we start? Meg asked humbly. Start with the short gun. She started to go into teaching mode. Meg had to admit that she was a woman with a special charm, especially when she was holding a gun. Whether it was a delicate short gun or a heavy machine gun with red flames, they all looked very harmonious in her hands. Meg did not doubt the damage these weapons could cause when they were in She's hands. The weapons in the underground city were not something that could be imagined on the Norland continent. Not to mention She's sniper rifle that could take the enemy's head from dozens of miles away. Even those short guns had shocking explosive power at close range. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.